To call to order the meeting of the Harwich Conservation Commission for January 16th, 2019. I first want to recognize the passing of Chet Burge, the former chairman of the Conservation Commission. He was chairman when I first came on, and I learned a lot from Chet, so I think I can say that we're all saddened by his loss, and we appreciate his service for the town of Harwich. The first item on the agenda is a request for determination of applicability for 5 Holden Street, a proposal to reconfigure first floor and add a second floor.
Good evening, Dan Croto from Moran Engineering. Here with Fergal Brannick, the applicant, and the owner, or the owner's husband, I should say. Fergal is a civil engineer. He designed the plans, the new proposed plans for his family. The idea is just to maintain the existing building, but put a second floor on it. We did go through Board of Health to get approval that it is the same amount of bedrooms, and he's been through Board of Appeals because this is in the tight area of Harwich Port, so he only has a 14-foot setback to the sideline. The footprint is not changing. He's aware of the floodplain and the requirements that he must stay under the state building code regulations. So he's here, and I'm here for any questions for this proposed project.
Thank you. Amy, do you have comments for us?
So this project is in flood zone, and it is in the buffer to a wetland. However, it is not dealing with anything but going up as proposed. So Dan and I had spoken, and on site today, some of the commissioners came with me on site and took a look at it. And my recommendation is that as proposed, so it is in floodplain, but if the building code, if your estimate for what the cost is going to be is the 50% or greater of the assessed or appraised value of the structure, you will have to come up to FEMA flood code requirements for what you propose to do for the whole house. Then you would, my recommendation is to prove it as is, and if in the building department, when you apply for a building permit, it is determined that you are above that threshold, that then you would have to refile with conservation or come for a change in plan, if you will. Anytime you have to add fill or do foundation work, it bumps up how we look at the project, essentially, the critical eye that we give to a project. But as per right now, you're not proposing any foundation work, you're proposing to go up, and it's not going to have any impact to the wetland resource area as presented. But I would say that we put that caveat on there that if it is determined that you have to be up to FEMA flood zone standards, you got to come back to conservation for that.
I think that the owner is aware of that, and I think that he would also be sent back to ZBA.
Right.
For lifting the house, he'd have to go back.
Right.
For that.
It is very low there, and I mean, to have to bring it up to code would be, I would imagine, substantial work to do so. So I would recommend for this existing proposal of negative determination number 3 to approve the project.
Thanks, Amy. Any comments from the commissioners? Mark, do you have any?
I agree with Amy.
Jim?
Yeah, that seems reasonable, but there will still be an order of conditions as far as construction practices in the buffer zone.
Absolutely. Staging like in the front of the house. So with an RDA, you can condition it. It doesn't come with usually the laundry list of conditions, but as far as debris containment, limit of work, things like that, just for as you're doing work on the house, we could condition that. There's space for it on the permit.
Okay, that's all. Yeah.
I have no questions.
John?
No questions.
Okay. All right, I have none. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the request for determination of applicability the -3 determination for 5 Holden Street to reconfigure the first floor and add second floor.
Second.
Seconded by Mark. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.
Stan, can you put these inside that envelope, that folder, please?
This one?
Yes.
Next up, we have a request for determination of applicability for the Tribush property, 64 Depot Road. A proposal for an addition, new deck, and minor grading. They have requested a continuance to February 20th, so I move that we do so.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, I think we're outside. The next packet.
Okay.
I don't think it's Bob Caparelli, I think it's CDM. It's Danielle.
Good evening.
Hi. Next, we have a notice of intent from the town of Harwich. The proposal to install new sewer mains, pumping stations within town-owned streets and associated right-of-ways to remove nitrogen from the Pleasant Bay watershed.
So my name is Danielle Gallant. I'm from CDM Smith, and this is Mike Judice, he's project engineer. And Mike will tell us just a little bit about the project on the whole, and then we'll talk about the Sugar Hill Pump Station in Harwich as well.
Sure, just to give everyone who may or may not be familiar with the project, I'm sure by now you've heard about it over the last few years, but this is phase 2 of the comprehensive wastewater management plan to bring sewer service to the Pleasant Bay area, Harwich. The project involves approximately 12 miles of sewer, situated along Route 137 and 39. Flow will eventually get down into Chatham. As you may or may not know, the town entered into an intermunicipal agreement with Chatham to buy capacity at their wastewater treatment plant. So the purpose of this project is to serve it's approximately 650 homes, plus or minus, and bring that flow into Chatham. It'll serve as the starting point of future expansion for phase 3, which is shown in green on the figure here, which would happen presumably in another 5 or 6 years down the line. So again, we've got about 12 miles of pipe in this first phase. It's going to be constructed under 2 construction contracts. There are a total of 6 pumping stations associated with the system, 2 of which are the subject of the NOI. There are no other resource area impacts associated with any of the pipelines. It's all in the street and some parking lots, the Stop and Shop parking lot in particular. Everything else is in the street. There's no cross-country sewer in this phase of the project. So the subject of the submittal is the Sugar Hill Drive pumping station located down here at the bottom of the hill. And then there's a small grinder pumping station at the end of Harden Lane. Both streets, as you probably know, slope severely off of Church Street down toward the wetland area in Muddy Creek. So with that, I'll let
Sure.
Danielle
So on the other
talk in
board,
specifics.
we'll start with Sugar Hill. So in designing and siting this pumping station, we've
You want me to
It's
hold
very
it?
hard to,
I can hold it. They all have the plans too. I mean,
Okay.
would it
Okay.
actually make sense, since they have the plans, can I kind of point it to the audience? Because there might be some
Sure.
people.
Absolutely. or I
Yes,
could
that's
maybe
fine.
do that.
so when citing this pumping station, we did our best to keep it within the town-owned right-of-way, as well as as outside of the resource areas as we possibly could within reason. So the final siting of the pumping station, as seen on sheet CD1, shows approximately 30 square feet of permanent impact to land subject to coastal storm flowage, as well as approximately 50 square feet of the 60-foot no-build zone, and that's based on the corner of the building that will come off of the existing roadway. So you have, you have Muddy Creek there, so the wetlands that are directly associated with Muddy Creek are just down at the end of the dead end of Nickerson. You can see the flagged wetlands on the plans, so. I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry. Do we want to do the other one or one at a time?
Do you want to, does anybody have any questions on Sugar Hill, or?
You want to do them? You want to do one at a time?
I'd say do them both.
All right.
and
Okay,
then we'll
sure.
come
I
back.
wasn't sure if we
Say-
could talk about Hardin Lane, if we
Yeah, I will
decided.
have to say that unfortunately, it was our error in advertising that, so obviously the abutters were notified, the filing is for both, but it only noted, and actually the map and parcel, we were only given the one, but, or at least on the notice of intent page, but it was our error that Hardin Lane didn't make it into the legal ad. So, we're gonna have to continue, unfortunately, for that, just for the legal aspect of it.
Even though we did notify
We
abutters.
did notify abutters, but we didn't have it in the legal ad in the
Advertisement.
paper or on the agenda as Hardin Lane as well. It just had Sugar Hill,
Okay.
so sorry about that.
So I
maybe we-
guess it's your
Maybe we just-
discretion.
Let's not talk about Hardin Lane
Okay,
today.
all right,
Let's
that's,
just to be safe. It's a big project, so, rather do it.
Could I just make a suggestion, just for consideration, that we at least do a quick little discussion? If you have any questions or audience members have any concerns or issues associated with Hardin Lane, then we can at least have some time to address those before we come back the next time, rather than hearing them for the first
That's
time
okay.
at the
We're just
next
not-
hearing. Is
just
that?
right, so
does
we
that make
could
sense?
continue, not vote tonight, but continue.
Okay.
And I
Just
think
a
that's good
suggestion.
too, because we
That's
did notify, just in case anybody
Sure.
came based on that notification, we don't
Sure.
want to.
True. Okay.
Give them the opportunity to.
So,
speak
Hardin Lane is a below-grade grinder unit with a electrical pedestal associated with it. It would be located in the center circle of the roadway, and it's in riverfront only. It stays outside of all of the town associated buffer zones, and it would be approximately 40 square feet of impacts within the riverfront of Muddy Brook.
all right. Amy, do you want to run us through your thoughts on the two?
Sure. So, if you wanna- thank you, you're welcome. So for, Danielle and I have been speaking for a while actually on the concepts for, especially Sugar Hill, being the proximity, to the wetland there at Sugar Hill. So, essentially this was the, come up with this the best alternative for the area. But maybe you can address a little bit about, because we have had some questions regarding both of them actually, why it has to be, exactly kind of where it is. So based on, the pumping elevations, why are these two sites your preferred alternatives?
So I can speak to that. So for Sugar Hill, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, as I said, it sits probably a couple hundred feet below Church Street. So in order to get those homes up into the gravity system on Church Street, it needs to be pumped. So, typically for a pumping station, you site it at the low point of the system, and unfortunately, in most cases, the low point of an area happens to have associated wetlands with it. So, as Danielle alluded to a few minutes ago, the intent of the town is try to minimize the easements that need to be taken for the project. So because we have the situation with the right-of-way associated with that Nickerson Road, we originally looked at putting it down the end of that little dead end on Nickerson. Then once we flagged the wetlands and started consulting with Amy, we realized that maybe that wasn't the best alternative, just in terms of impacts to the wetland resource area. So we moved it as far out as we could. As you can see, it's right pretty close to Sugar Hill Road at that point. We've actually proposing to take up a little section of Nickerson to help keep the building of the pumping station further away from the no disturb and no build zones. So, again, the general intent is need to be in a low point because that's where gravity is going to take the flow from the wastewater. In terms of Harden Lane, the original concept for that street, there are 6 houses on Harden that slopes away from Church Street. The original concept was to put in a pressure sewer system with individual grinder pumps at each of the 6 homes. There were some concerns expressed by some of the residents that came forward that were wondering if there was another option to negate having to have individual grinder pumps. So the town agreed to have us look at other options. What we came up with was this solution, that rather than having 6 individual grinder pumps at each of the homes, there'd be one town-owned grinder pump station. Because it's only 6 homes, we wouldn't typically put a big submersible pumping station like we are in Sugar Hill that's serving many more homes. So we thought that this grinder pump station within the town right-of-way to be owned and operated by the town was a more reasonable solution to serve that area. So that's pretty much how we did that.
Thank you. Another question regarding, so Sugar Hill is going to actually have a little building on it. The other one is pretty much subsurface. But can you talk a little bit, so at what's going to be in the ground and what types of fail-safes are there going to be in place to ensure, if there's a leak or something else, that it's not getting into the water body that we're trying to protect?
Sure. So you can start with Harden Lane, just because that's smaller. So it's, as I said, a grinder pumping unit. It's essentially a fiberglass HDPE unit. It's about 4 feet in diameter, 10 to 12 feet deep. All you'll see is just a plastic cover, essentially, at the ground surface. However, associated with that is an electrical pedestal, a rather small, about 4 foot by 4 foot electrical pedestal. Obviously, that has to be up on the ground. So that's what the components of Harden Lane would be. For Sugar Hill, as I indicated before, that's a submersible pumping station, so there are several components. First is the wet well. So the wet well is a below-grade precast concrete structure, approximately 10 feet by 6 feet, that will take all the flow from the area by gravity. Inside that wet well will be 2 submersible pumps that will pump flow out, what we call it, into a pressure pipe, a force main that pumps it up the street, up into Church Street. There's a 4-inch diameter force main coming out of the pumping station up to Church Street. So that's the below grade component. There's also an associated meter pit. So for the force main going out, we want to measure how much flow the pumps are pumping. So there'll be another small separate structure, about a 4 by 4 precast concrete structure, about 5 or 6 feet deep. And then there's a building. So the direction from the town was to try to make these stations as aesthetically pleasing as possible, to the extent that you can for a pumping station. So the intent here is that it'll have a look of a relatively large shed. It's about 12 by 16 foot, 12 foot by 16 foot structure. It's going to house the emergency generator and all the electrical equipment. So it's all going to be inside the building. A pitched roof, asphalt shingled, cedar siding to make it, look relatively attractive. So in terms of fail-safe, as I indicated, there's an emergency generator that'll be gas-powered, so that if there's an electrical failure and the pumps can't run, the emergency generator will kick on and operate the pumps. There's also a, what we call a SCADA system, supervisory control system that will give the town, the water department, which will, I presume, become the sewer department, information about the pumps to make sure they're operating correctly. It has level indicators that tell them if if there's a backup or if one of the pumps is failing, they'll get an alarm. So there are alarms that get sent back remotely to the town staff so they can go out and service the station. So that's.
But there's no additional like containment around the pumps or anything like that. I don't know much about it. I'm just asking, like, if there's a break in something, if we have a leak, there's
no containment. So the pipes themselves are PVC pipes.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, the wet well is a precast concrete structure,
Right.
so they're pretty, pretty solid.
Pretty solid.
No concerns about leaks. The reality is, because the sewer is so deep, it's below the groundwater table.
That's my next
So
question.
if there is a leak,
Yeah.
the water's going into the pipe, it's not coming out of the pipe because of the hydrostatic pressure. So if the groundwater is at a certain level and the pipe is down here, if there
Yeah.
happened to be a leak in the pipe, and that's an issue with all sewer systems that the town will become familiar with over the next 20 or 30 years. Once you put a pipe below the groundwater level, you have to deal with what we call II, infiltration and inflow. So again, if the pipe is below groundwater level, sewage isn't going to go out, the groundwater is going to go in.
I don't have any more questions right now.
Okay. I'm going to go through comments from the commissioners, then I'll ask for comments from the audience in just a minute. If that's okay. Mark, do you have any thoughts?
No, actually, it looks like it's pretty well thought out to me.
Yeah. Jim?
No, not for now.
Okay.
You mentioned there are alarms and everything, so if there is like a overflow, or not an overflow, but if it was getting too full, and that would include whether, even if there's a power outage and the generator were not to function?
Correct. There's a generator fail alarm. So so there's a level indicator inside the wet well, so the town will be able to monitor what the level of the wastewater is in the wet well, and that's an indication, obviously, if the level is increasing, that maybe you have an issue with the pump. So
But if the power's out, would that negate
there's
that?
a battery backup for the alarm system as well. So if power is out, the alarm system has a battery backup, so it could still send alarms. And these, there's a point I made to one of the residents out in the hallway. Normal operating procedure is that each of these pumping stations will get visited on a daily basis by town staff, or if they hire a subcontractor to do it. These aren't things that you put in the ground, you install, and until you have an issue, you never visit them. They get visited every day, the pumps get checked, all the systems get checked, so it's something that's going to be part of a regular maintenance and oversight process.
But if you got to that position where the alarm was going off, how would you stop the possibility of an overflow?
So the town will have spare pumps that they can, so there's either submersible pumps that sit down in the wastewater in the wet well, and they're on rails, and they can be brought up relatively quickly and a new pump put in its place. So if there's an issue with one, so there's two pumps, so there's a duty pump and a standby pump, and they alternate each cycle. So one will pump for one cycle until the wastewater comes down to a certain level. The next time the second pump will pump on, and they
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of containment. If there were an outage and the generator failed, and this whole neighborhood, I don't remember how many homes we're talking about, what's the flow of water coming into that pit coming in
Yep.
that could cause an overflow situation?
So, an unlikely scenario, but I guess not an impossible scenario. So the town will also have portable pumps that they could bring in, gas-operated or gas-powered portable pumps that can be put into the wet well to pump up to Church Street. So there's several different levels of protection. Again, that scenario is relatively unlikely, but
I guess. I guess I'm not sure of the flow going into that well from that neighborhood at that time and how quickly you might run into an overflow situation. That's what I don't understand.
And we can get you the, so there's storage capacity built into the wet well itself, so there's quite a bit of storage capacity. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I would have to guess that in the case of an extended power outage, there's probably capacity for maybe a week or so. So you have to remember, during a power outage, people aren't running, people aren't running the dishwasher, they're not running the washing machine, so the flow naturally goes down during a situation as you described, a power outage. So the flows are decreased to begin with, but there is storage capacity built into the wet well, as well as capacity in the pipes themselves. So there's quite a bit of capacity to hold.
That's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah, so there is, and we can get you that number, but there is a time period that we have storage to take additional flow if for some reason the pumps aren't operable.
So it's not a scenario where in a matter of minutes there would
That's
be
what I was
some
trying. That's what I was trying to
catastrophic
understand.
overflow.
We
Yeah, there's
design-
containment and.
We design it pretty conservatively to have excess capacity for such an occurrence.
Okay, thank you.
So, so on the Harden Lane one, there's a generator, on the other one, but on Harden Lane, what's the backup there? Or is it-
So for that size station, it's not economical to have a generator there full-time, so the town will have a portable trailer-mounted generator.
I see.
So they'll be able to bring that out in case of a power outage. There is one other pumping station out of the 7 that'll be built as part of this phase that also doesn't have an on-site generator because it serves about 20 homes or so. So it's the same scenario. The electrical cabinet comes built with essentially a plug. You can plug in a portable generator to start the pumps up.
And on the Sugar, just to follow up on what Stan was asking, on the Sugar Hill installation, how big is the wet well? Do you have a size, either gallons in capacity or just dimensions?
I don't have gallons, but dimensions, it's roughly 10 feet. It's actually oval shaped. It's about 10 feet long and 6 feet wide, I believe. And it'll be about 15 feet deep.
I see.
So we can get that
Yeah, right.
volume for you, but it's quite a bit of capacity, yes.
6 by 10 by 16, is that what you said?
It's roughly 15, 16 feet deep, I believe. It's a lot of work.
All set, John?
Yes, all set, thank you.
I've got a couple comments. So it looks like there's a catch basin. Is that a permanent catch basin to receive flow from the road, or is that a temporary construction catch basin?
At Sugar Hill?
Sugar Hill.
That's actually an existing catch basin,
Oh,
so
you
that'll
did.
have to be relocated. I don't believe we showed that on the drawing, but that'll be relocated as part of this.
Okay.
That's an existing basin.
Yep. Do you know where it will go?
I don't, but
Okay.
we'll get that laid out. It'll go right at, somewhere in that same vicinity, just on the edge of the road.
And there wouldn't be any expected changes to flow from the street, same, okay. I guess we probably should talk about, there's a variance request associated with this.
It is, because while there is nothing in the 50-foot no disturb zone, part of the building is within the 60-foot no build zone. So as far as, they looked at the alternatives, and also, there's no trees or anything coming down, there's a little bit of like invasive shrub that they had marked out in the field, but that would be about it. I think as mitigation, because we usually look for mitigation when we're dealing with variances, is just the vast amount of water quality improvement going into Muddy Creek and Pleasant Bay as a result. So they are requesting a variance from the 60-foot no new structure regulation.
And I think that's easily supportable. I just wasn't sure if folks thought there should be some physical mitigation on the site as opposed to the conceptual mitigation, which I think is truly impressive and vast, and it's exciting that it's happening.
Mhm.
So, everyone comfortable with that approach?
Yeah, because I think the site is just where the building is. I mean, where would you put mitigation, I guess?
Most of it's in, part of it's in the road itself,
Right.
so.
Yes.
All you could do, really, there's almost
Grass
nothing you could do
area.
other than just have plantings in the area that was disturbed to put the building in. And that's about it, I think.
On town, which is the town property part of the roadway.
And I do believe that we show a couple plantings at Sugar Hill, and then in Hardin Lane, it might not be very obvious, but we do propose plantings of grasses and
Right.
perennial plants.
Right, and Harding's Lane, I don't think has any variance requirements.
Because it's
So-
outside of the.
Right, it would really be a small amount at the Sugar Hill site if we thought it was necessary. Well, why don't you mull that over and we'll take comments from the audience. I think in the back you had a question?
What assurances have the residents of the area have that it will not affect traffic so we can get to our homes? That's kind of a loop, and this whole project is right near the junction of Sugar Hill and Nicholson. Okay, that's the first question. Second question is any land being taken, private land being taken by Eminent Domain for this project? Third question is exactly where is the shed that you propose, because it's gonna go to, at the end of Nicholson Drive at the dead end, there's a resident driveway there, so I assume it's beyond that.
If you would,
Sure.
please. And
So, traffic is the first question.
So traffic, I assume you're talking about during construction, sir?
Yes.
So there'll be a traffic management plan that the contractor will be required to prepare. There may be, for those homes on, say, a dead-end road, a time where you won't be able to access your home by vehicle during the day while construction is going on. But you know about that well in advance, and we make provisions for people to get their cars outside of the construction zone, so that if you needed to.
We can't go around the loop, Sugar Hill?
Depending on where the construction is, fortunately, you do have that loop there, so that makes that situation a little bit easier. So as they're constructing on one side of the loop, obviously you can go out the other way, but there may be some periods of time when they're in the intersection where it's gonna be hard for people to pass through that when they're digging 15 feet deep. So for those periods, you know, you would be made aware of it well in advance, and the town would make provisions for you to take your car before they start digging for that day, and put it on the other side of the construction, on the Church Street side, so you could come and go during the day as you please. The road would be passable at the end of the workday at nighttime, so that wouldn't be an issue. So it's really just for that period during the day when they're working. So those are the types.
There will be days that we can't get to our house, we have to park the car somewhere else.
That's correct, sir. Depending on exactly where your home is.
Or we have to be notified to move our cars.
You will be notified, and you will have good communication, you'll be notified, and you'll have people knocking on your door if you haven't already gotten your car out by the time they're ready to start work.
What about emergencies? Fire or ambulance service?
So there always have to be provisions to maintain emergency access for fire or ambulance. The contractors will have steel plates on hand so they can put over the excavation if needed. And all that needs to be worked out by the contractor with the emergency personnel prior to starting construction. So that's all part of that traffic management plan that he'll be required to prepare.
And Mike, just, so is the traffic management plan going to be made public? Is there going to be, a public information session about it?
We haven't gotten to that point, but typically that's what we do before any construction starts. We'll have a public meeting to answer all these questions. Until we have a contractor, on board, we won't know exactly what their plan is, but I would imagine there's gonna be a series of public meetings where people are, given the information
Right.
and allowed to ask questions.
Perfect.
Yep. And he left. He did have another question about eminent domain. So in this particular case, we went through great pains to keep the pumping station within the town right-of-way. Harden Lane, similar situation, and there's one other pumping station up at Huckleberry will be within the town right-of-way. There are 4 other pumping stations, however, that the town has to take easements from private property. They've already started those negotiations, discussions, so those homeowners have been notified and made aware, and had conversations with the town administrator. I don't believe the town is going to take them by eminent domain, but that's a question, you know, that I'm not able to answer. They are getting easements from 4 individual property owners.
Right, but not these before us
But
tonight.
not these
Yep.
before you, that's correct.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Please announce your name.
Kelly Burkhardt.
Mhm.
I'm gonna be about, my driveway and my property is about 10 feet away from this proposed pumping station at Sugar Hill. So I'm thinking that if there was a mechanical problem and it did back up, it would back up first to my house. I'm wondering?
Well, you say backup, you know, I don't wanna get people to think that there's gonna be backups, but, you know, it's, as I said, there's capacity in the pumping station for if there's a mechanical failure of any kind.
Yeah.
To contain wastewater flow for a period of time until the town can address the situation, depending on what's actually occurring.
All right.
Either replacing a pump with a spare pump or putting in portable pumps, you know, it's not gonna get to the point where wastewater is coming up out of the ground.
Do we have options on the types of pumps? There's submersible and then there's a
Suction lift?
Yeah.
Those are options that we evaluated during the design process, and the town made the decision at our recommendation to use submersible pumps, because they're more efficient. And the footprint of the pumping station site itself is minimized with a submersible pumping station arrangement as opposed to a suction lift station. So with the suction lift station, essentially what it is, instead of as the submersible pumps, the pumps are, as the name indicates, are below the water. For a suction lift station, the pumps are all above ground, and then you have a pipe going down into the wet well, and essentially just is sucking the wastewater up into the pumps, and then out the force main. So those pumps have to be housed in a building, so that building would contain, in that scenario, the pumps. The generator would have to find somewhere else to go. So either the building would have to get much larger to accommodate the generator to be inside, or that generator would have to be situated somewhere else on the site, therefore taking up even more space in the area.
So with that being said, the submersible,
Submersible.
thank you.
You're welcome.
That's within a shed, but is that contained by something else within the shed?
So
Is it an open kind of a concrete cover to it? What's the cover?
So the pumps themselves are in what we call the wet well. That's
Yeah.
where all the wastewater comes into. That's a concrete structure. So at the ground surface, there'll just be a flat piece of concrete, you know, the top of this wet well with two access hatches. So metal hatches that allow you to get to the pumps to pull them out. The building itself is, again, gonna look like a small garage or a large shed. It's gonna be completely enclosed, it's gonna have a door,
I
a couple of
think
louvers, it's gonna have the generator inside and all the electrical equipment. So that, the pumps aren't in the building. As I said, that would be the situation with the suction lift station where the pumps would be inside.
So then, once they get done and you have all of the safeguards in place, and then there's people working every day that come up to check the pumps on site,
Yes.
checking them. And this is something totally other property, but is there also testing to make sure that, I'm at a loss for words, to make sure that there's not overgrowth of certain organisms that shouldn't be growing? You know, Chatham does that, right? The wastewater treatment center itself does that, they come out and get samples
In the plant.
in the
you're
plant.
talking. Okay, yeah.
Or they're,
So there's no sampling associated with the wastewater. So the wastewater doesn't stay at the pumping station for very long. So the pumps operate on an operating range of probably 1.5 feet. So every time there's an additional 1 or 2 feet of wastewater that comes in the station, the pump turns on. So that keeps the wastewater moving and cycling and pumping it out, so you don't, are you concerned about?
I'm concerned about exactly, I'm trying to get a picture in my head of what it
You don't want
would-
a picture. We can show you pictures
I'm a
if you
nerd,
really.
so it's okay. The other thing, I think being probably the closest one to Sugar Hill, I'd be concerned about, it sounds like you're doing a great job on the aesthetics of it. I'd be concerned about noise, I'd be concerned about the smell, and then I'd be concerned about it breaking down, and if there was a problem mechanically, it sounds like you have every other safeguard in place, how soon could you get it fixed?
So as I said, you know, the most likely thing to happen is have a pump fail or get clogged.
Right.
The town is gonna have spare pumps, so they'll come out with a truck and pull out the pump that's malfunctioned, presuming the other one isn't operating, and in most cases it would be, so there's 2 pumps there, so that's the first level of protection. If one pump fails, you have the second one that'll automatically turn on. So if there's an issue with one of the pumps, that'll get pulled, and the town will put the spare pump back in, so now again you have 2 pumps operating. The second one fails, then they pull that out. And they be out relatively quickly. As I said, they have a SCADA system that allows them to monitor the water level in the wet well. So if they see that water level rising, there are other alarms as well. There's a pump failure alarm. If the pump isn't running, there's an alarm. And they'll also see the wastewater rising. Smell, our experience has been, you will not get odors from the station. As I said, these are cycling relatively frequently. We will have some carbon canisters available, and that helps knock down any odors that may be emanating. You indicated noise a few minutes ago. Unless you are literally standing on top of the wet well, you won't hear the pumps, and all you will hear if you are standing on top of the wet well on the hatch is just sort of a humming sound. The only noise of consequence, and we talked about this before, is the generator. That'll have to get exercised once a week or so. So that'll be time to turn on sometime during the day, so it's not going off at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's, you know, at noontime or something. And we even talked about syncing it up with your generator, so it's exercising at the same time to minimize the additional noise disruption.
Thank you. Other comments from the audience?
So you can vote on Sugar Hill if you want tonight, or we do technically, even if it's just for a few minutes, the next time we have to open it up for Hardin Lane. So if you want to table everything until then, or if, you want to vote on at least one port on Sugar Hill, you can do so tonight.
I'd go on your advice, giving the posting, what happened with the posting issue.
It really doesn't matter either way. The orders and conditions won't get issued. They'll get issued at the same time.
It's gonna be one order for.
Yeah, it's just gonna be one order for the both of them. So, I mean, in terms of timing, keep it neater. Let's just continue.
Sure.
And unless anybody has any more input on either of those, I think it's looking in a
Okay, Stan?
positively.
I just have one other comment. As we were looking at the site, when I see what happens in the news nowadays with cars driving into buildings and everything, it's not a conservation issue. But I mean, that building's taking up part of the street. I wonder how big of an issue that could be potentially in bad weather or even driving at night when it's dark. I'm not looking for an answer, I'm just saying it's a...
Ideally, this wouldn't be our first choice to locate the building here, but we are considering, in all likelihood, probably putting some bollards up or something just for some
barrier,
added
like
protection.
a Jersey-type barrier or
Not
something.
even just some bollards,
yeah,
some concrete
gotcha. To protect the
cylindrical
building.
bollards just to help protect. But it is an issue, but again, given the confines of the site and
Oh, I
the
know.
situation of the wetlands, we didn't really have much
Right.
choice, unfortunately.
So our next meeting would be February 6th. Again, apologies about that.
That's fine.
Sometimes we little oversights.
I think the answer is that we don't have any issues with it, so it's just,
No further comments on the mitigation piece? Okay. It's in the new 60-foot no-build zone. So does that language carry the same mitigation as the 0 to 50?
No, it's still the 50 to 100, so it'll be the
Okay.
2 to 1.
Be 2 to 1.
But they're not removing any native vegetation.
Right. Yep, okay.
It's up to you, but
No, I'm just trying to think it out to make sure we're consistent and that it works. It is a new regulation for us.
in my mind, there's other bigger mitigation factors
Right.
for this project.
Okay, well, I move that we continue. What date was suitable for you guys? Just the next available date?
I would say
February
yes.
6th.
February 6th,
Yep,
okay?
February 6th.
Second.
Seconded by John. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I know.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Next, we have a notice of intent for the Bowman property at 176 John Joseph Road, proposal for Vista pruning.
Hello, Amy. Hello, everybody. Hello,
Evening.
Mr. Chase. I've met everybody else today during the Vista visit.
I didn't make it.
I know.
Yep.
Got better things to do with you.
I wouldn't say that. but
Okay.
I had a meeting.
We think this may be the third time this property has ever come before the Conservation Commission in the last 25 years. We bought our property next door to it, a summer cottage, 25 years ago, and we've been residents of Harwich ever since. And kids grew up learning to swim in John Joseph Pond, and we've been abutters ever since. When we bought this property, one day there was a knock on the door. The owner of the property that we now own saying, we'd like you to help us get Vista pruning done. So we signed off on it for him. This was about 13 or 14 years. Then 12 years ago, you saw the DEP file number, was when we built our house, starting 12 years ago. Now, all of that Vista pruning that was done 15 years ago has grown up. And a friend of mine said to me a couple of years ago, you know, you can't see the pond very much anymore, because he'd been with me there ever since the beginning. So we'd like to do the Vista pruning to enjoy the pond.
All right. Amy, any comments for us?
Yep. First, Mr. Borman had to file with the Natural Heritage Program, so he did so, and he received what we call a no-take letter, meaning what he's proposing to do and that is not gonna have an adverse impact to any state-listed wildlife that might be near there. So I included this. It was a letter that you got, it was in the previous package, but we hadn't heard from Heritage yet last time, so I just had recommended we continue. Why have 2 hearings, and we don't have to, hopefully. So this is again included, and this, I apologize, it doesn't, there's basically, it's a trapezoid. If you're standing at the back of the Borman property, right in the middle, and you're looking out, it goes out kind of like a fan towards the water, and it's not for removals, it's for, basically, the 2 corridors are kind of between this beautiful oak tree that you have your bird feeder on in the backyard, just to the left of that and just to the right of that. So it is defined in the field. Some of this will have to be somewhat discussed with the arborist who does the work, but for the most part,
I assume you'll be there?
I will.
Good.
I spoke with the Bormans and said, these are our pruning guidelines, essentially pruning down of existing lower vegetation and pruning up of most of the trees to get a view through vegetation rather than topping. There are a few juvenile pitch pines right at the top that there's one or two that are not really in the view quarter because they're behind that oak. There's really no need to touch those, but right next to it there are a few. We benefit from, you could flush cut, maybe plant a few low growing shrubs just to hold the top of that bank right there. But for the most part, it's pruning to lower the existing, there's some trees that have been cut in the past, a while ago, and maintaining those at a shrub level towards the top of the bank, and then the other trees in that corridor being pruned again to achieve a view more so through the vegetation than over it. So, and no work at this time on the stuff that there's actually a few willows that are in the water down at the bank. No
I
work.
wanted to ask you, that didn't come up in the site, during the site visit today, to get your view on how and when that should be done, because you want to get rid of them.
Well, they are invasive, so the willows that are there at the base are gray willows. They're an invasive tree. It's not currently proposed in your little blurb here.
Right.
It would take a bit more work to do it because they're in the water. So that would be something, what I would like to see is if you're arborist, we talk about it, and if we can come to a way that we can remove some of those without having major damage to the pond edge there. Maybe we amend this at a future date.
As you wish.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. But working with Mr. Borman and whoever he chooses as an arborist, I would recommend approval of the project.
Thanks, Amy. Any comments? Mark?
Nope, I completely agree with what Amy said.
Well, yeah, it sounds like this will be pretty much up to your discretion, Amy, as we have.
We'll keep it. We try to achieve a good view with doing the minimal amount of work possible, which also is cost effective for the applicant.
Right. Yeah, I think as long as you're there working with them.
Yeah.
She and I know each other well.
You do, huh?
Yes, yes.
Stan?
I have no questions.
Okay, John?
I think it's fine.
All right, I have no questions. Someone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent at 176 John Joseph Road for Vista pruning.
Second.
Second by Mark. Any further discussion on conditions, or I think we're all set, given what Amy said?
I will draft the conditions, and you'll see those. So we'll approve tonight, and then you'll see the conditions within a couple weeks before they go to Mr. Borman. So
Sounds good.
And that you'd be working with the arborists
absolutely.
that they pick.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Supervising closely.
Aye.
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 Motion carries.
Won't be there all day, but.
Thank
All
you
set.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Ted, the way we do this is we approved it, we're gonna draft the permit.
Yeah.
And then at our next meeting, we'll officially sign it, and you'll have it after that, so you have it in a couple weeks.
I won't do any cutting.
No cutting yet.
Stand you want-
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. This is for the notice of intent for Ken and Brenda Weeks at 116 South Street. I'd like to have this continued until
February 6th.
February 6th.
Second?
All those in favor? Opposed?
One abstention.
Abstaining?
One
Two
abstention.
abstentions.
Let me see if the next applicant's out in the hallway.
To that mass conference, they have a running meeting session, so I'm gonna do that one. I didn't do it last year.
What's it on?
There's one of the classes
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
they do. Last year I did wetlands and erosions.
Yep.
And that's one of the ones that they're
Oh, yeah.
offering us.
Oh, yeah, that's good. So you are going?
Oh, yeah, I went, I was the only one that went last year.
Yep.
It was good.
Oh, it is good.
Somebody else freezing in here.
I think John may go.
Freeze?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't change it, I wish I could, sorry. sorry.
The air conditioning's blowing.
This room is always cold, as Mary said, but cold tonight.
It balances well with there's 3 people in the large room and 30 in here.
It just so happened that this big meeting fell on a night when we were have to be in here, so. Wow. And that room's usually warm. I'm straggling, thank you.
Okay, next we have a notice of intent, continuance for the Vale property of 85 Subquantum Road, proposal to construct a bulkhead, boathouse, dock, access path, stair relocation with tree cutting and site restoration. Good evening.
Good evening. Say again? No. Okay. So for the record, I'm Mark Burgess of Shorefront Consulting. We have Dan Proto from Moran Engineering and Emma from Blue Flax Design, and the applicant, Rick Vale, right next to me. So we left, I'm going to summarize the project again just because our memories, it's been, what, 4 weeks now? And then, well, anyway, let me just summarize it. So the elements of the proposed project is to reconstruct the existing boathouse and elevate it 1.5 feet, remove a damaged bulkhead and reinstall it 8 feet landward. Last time it was 6, but now it's been moved 8 feet landward, with a subsequent reduction in square feet. Install 207 square feet of deck. Now the deck it's 22 by 10, but with the way we get to 207 is one of the sides is angled. I don't know if you can see that unless you start using your reading glasses or a magnifying glass, but I saw that, I'm like, wait, what? So yeah, one side is angled a little bit to stay out of the BVW. None of the deck is in the BVW. Install 194 square feet of new BVW on the east side, and that's accomplished with fill behind the bulkhead and plantings, and Emma can give you some detail on that if you still need it. We're going to remove and relocate the existing landing and steps closer to the boathouse so they land on the proposed deck. Install a new access path along the slope, and we went into this in detail. There's no fill, it's only cut only with stabilization of the slope. Place 8 cubic yards of fill behind the new wall to an elevation of 32.5. Flush cutting 12 pine trees, removing invasives and replanting, and again, Emma can talk about that portion of it. So, that's the project in a nutshell. Now, when we left here last time, my understanding was we had 2 outstanding issues. One, we hadn't heard from MISA yet. Obviously, we have a no-take letter. That was partially a result of a study that was done out on the site, and with that information forwarded to National Heritage. So the particular species that they're interested in does not exist on the site, and we have a no-take letter. The second question was, how much of the bulkhead can be rebuilt under the Act, because it pre-existed the Act and things like that. So there's been a lot of correspondence back and forth. Amy's provided you with some. Town council had been consulted on it, and we have an answer back from them. So the shortest way I can say this is that the word grandfathering doesn't appear in the Wetlands Protection Act. That word only appears under the riverfront area section, which doesn't apply here. However you want to call it, structures that pre-exist the Wetlands Protection Act, the effective date of April 1st, 1983, are governed under limited projects, and there are 2 sections in the area. It's 310 CMR 53, paragraph 3. Subsection I talks about structures in general, and then goes on to get in more detail about dams. But then paragraph L talks about bulkheads, piers, seawalls, revetments, and water-dependent structures. So town council felt that section L was more appropriate, and in summary, could be that portion of the project could be approved under the limited project provision. And again, regardless of how you want to say it, you know, we've all dealt with projects that have pre-existed the act, and they've been allowed to be reconstructed, rebuilt, maybe somewhat expanded, but I've been doing that for 18 years. It's very common in every town. There was one on the pond, just at 65 Subquantum, that was this concrete structure, and we built a bulkhead around it. And even had a date carved in the concrete, you know. So all of these old structures, however you want to call it, if they pre-exist the act, there is a way to renew them. So with that, is there anything else you want to say at this point?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. Just, I mean, I think Mark summed all of that up really well. I guess I just want to reemphasize that, you know, going back to my initial meeting when we were taking down the main house, that I said I wanted to improve the waterfront. I wanted to naturalize more than what has been since, you know, at least the 1960s. And I think we've really tried to accomplish that. You know, we have over 4,000 square feet of structure and related parking facilities coming out of the 100-foot area. We're looking at pulling that bulkhead back 8 feet across the board to restore a resource area. The one thing that we were looking for in return was to do this deck. And the deck is important for me for a couple of reasons. One, because of its functionality, but two, because having lived on the pond for 12 years, I understand how the pond front gets used. And the alternative to that deck was to just put the bulkhead where it was before, fill behind it, bring it back to lawn, which it was last year, and you have a nice area you can stay on and people stay contained on that. But that, to me, wasn't the best thing for the pond, and it wasn't really necessary. I didn't need a football field down there. When we look at putting the deck there, it contains people, it contains furniture, it contains off-season storage, and it really is, at this point, it is allowed under a variance, and because we are removing other structure and because we are providing mitigation. And I understand that the board could have some concern about setting a precedent with this. And I guess my answer to that would be that if someone came forward, if the precedent is that you remove 4,000 square feet of structure and related parking from the 100-foot buffer, and you remove 8 by 120 feet of structure and remove that amount of fill that's in the pond, and in return it's a 200-foot deck, I think that precedent isn't necessarily a bad precedent. I don't think it sets one that anyone can just have a deck. I think it's setting one that if you're willing to go above and beyond to restore the waterfront and push things back from the waterfront, improve the quality on that site, that's not a massive trade-off, is the way, you know, that I'm looking at it. So I think that's all I had to say, and you know, our commitment to improve the site is very much still there. Obviously, we're hoping to move forward with it, and obviously here to answer any questions or discuss whatever we need to.
Thank you. Amy, do you have a summary for us?
Sure. So, yes, a lot has happened in the past couple days, not even couple weeks, couple days. So you all should have the site summary, which they've seen everything that you've gotten, is different than if you all have this letter in your packets from Amy Questle, our town council. It was an email to me, and it came in just last night. So I had emailed it to you today. If you didn't see it, it is here now. And it goes through the limited project provision. And just speaking in general, I mean, we see a lot of people with claims of grandfathering. And for the most part, I mean, if something hasn't been there for 30 years, it's a little different than if something was actually there, in my mind, last year, such as this project. So while there isn't grandfathering, this, and I've gotten some education too, we don't see these very often. I think everybody, I don't know how often you've seen them. It's a checkbox on the notice of intent, is this a limited project? And it, like, the go-to is automatically no. But there is a section that kind of deals with grandfathering without calling it grandfathering. And it doesn't say you have to approve it, it says it lets you do it if you want to. It lets you approve a project, essentially. And that's, 310 CMR 10.533L. We did feel it was more dealing with dams, but that this project could fit in, if you saw fit to grant a variance, this would be the section that you would do it under. And it's for, in general, water-dependent structures, direct access, or location to tidal or inland waters. Examples includes piers, wharves, marinas, boathouses, shoreline protection, jetties, revetments, seawalls, ripraps, and floats. So, I know the commission was, I think, we all saw that what was there before versus what's proposed now, there's a difference there. So, if the commission saw fit wanted to find a way to approve a project, this would be how you would do it. It's not necessarily unapprovable. So, I'll leave it that as far as the bulkhead. I think we've always been in agreement about the boathouse being in the same footprint, just elevated a little bit higher. Recreating the staircase down, or creating a new staircase down the banking. The plantings. The only outlying concerns are, one, the path, and then the deck itself. And I have to be honest, I can see both sides of the benefits of the deck, as well as I can see the verbatim letter of the law as well. If we can find a way to really contain activity, we need to monitor and assure that these BBWs and plantings are all doing well, that storage is appropriate, then I think it could be a good idea for the pond, or for this area. It is, and as they said, I think we wouldn't just be allowing a deck. There's a lot of potential mitigation here. So, but I can see both sides, if it's strict interpretation versus allowing a variance here. Unfortunately, I cannot. I view the path as a little bit, unfortunately, as unnecessary disturbance. So I can't recommend that piece of things. Okay.
Thank you, Amy. Any comments, starting with you, Mark?
More pass for the moment.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, take on the path in the bank. To frame that, this is supposed to be our no disturb zone, so just very few activities, if any, allowed. And the nature of constructing this, it's essentially excavating, several hundred square feet of a natural bank that is in good shape, that's not eroding. It's not something I'd like to see repeated, or even the stairs end up having impacts when you look at that shoreline. Almost everywhere there's stairs, you see erosion, but it should be absolutely minimized, so that perpendicular to the shoreline stairs are I look upon better. The bulkhead is tough. I mean, that whole section of the pond has a lot of bulkheading, and you're probably familiar with some of the negative impacts even. Just trying to use the pond, the waves reflect off it, and it's a whole different feeling being on the water there compared to the natural shorelines on the rest of the pond. So, I don't look favorably on bulkheading. There is, legality of the grandfathering seems a little cloudy, but I'm also interested why you guys think it needs to be bulkheaded lakeward or seaward of the proposed BVW mitigation. Why couldn't it just be natural there?
Do you want us to address those now?
Well, yeah, maybe that one point, because, more than half of the length of the bulkhead, we actually have BVW behind it, where it could just be, naturalized to.
Well, so the bulkhead, the premise from the start of this was that, hey, there was a bulkhead there, it predated the act, so therefore, in some provision or another, you're allowed to rebuild it. You're allowed to maintain and rebuild it. If it was a dock or any, same principle. So that's where we started. But then, as Rick said, he didn't want to put it out there. Now, it still needed to protect the shoreline because there is some erosion there. It got whacked really good over the winter. It removed all of the fill that was behind it. And we want to, part of the mitigation is to put wetland on the east side away from the use. And the bulkhead would protect that. I would almost guarantee you plant that wetland where we want to plant it without the bulkhead, it's gone in a year. And that doesn't serve anybody any good. So it's a balance of using what was there but making it better. So that's how I would address the bulkhead. The path is pretentious. That's certainly a topic for discussion. It's not a showstopper. And the stairs, of course, you put them over the bank. If we're going to remove them, we're going to relocate them, so you have a chance to elevate them enough and make sure there's no erosion underneath. You get a chance to do it right.
Right.
And you know how a lot of the properties are along there. They've been doing things since before we were born.
The stairs, the elevated stairs seem to be the best possible solution for that.
So it's just a matter of a balance of taking what's there and trying to make it better.
As far as where the bulkhead is, since it's below natural high water, if you planted there, it would get washed away, of course,
Without it, right.
without the bulkhead.
Mhm.
However, if you planted or just allowed to naturalize that area, I don't believe there would be erosion. I think the plants would come in and it would naturalize. When you look at either side of that area, there's no erosion. There's very thick vegetation, and
The thing is, remember from the pictures, what was behind the bulkhead was probably a foot higher than what's there now. All that soil's gone and is all cobble on the beach. So there's nothing that tells me that that's going to stay that way. That it's going to continue every time that pond floods. It's going to continue to remove soil and reduce the wetland to cobble until it gets to the edge of the bank, and then it's going to start chewing to the edge of the bank. And that's evident along a lot of that shoreline, especially from this winter.
yeah, I've only really seen that where there's continuous impacts from people using it. Where it's left to naturalize, it seems to really grow in vigorously and be protected naturally.
Well, fundamentally, where the bulkhead was and behind it for 40 years now has been usable land. That's been used by the homeowners, that's been used by guests, that's been used. Fundamentally, that would be gone if you remove the bulkhead. And that's really the bottom line. If you take away the bulkhead, the shoreline is completely gone. It's right up to the bank, and that's the end of it. And we saw that with this past winter and the storms, just breaching the bulkhead.
Yeah, I have the photos here, and that is how that lake shore is naturally. Is essentially the water comes up to a heavily vegetated bank, and then at seasonal low water, you tend to get some level of beach there.
I guess my point being that, there's sort of precedent all along the pond where bulkheads existed that people were allowed to, just as early as last year, put a new bulkhead in and fill behind it to protect what has been there.
Right.
I guess that's how we started the process, and then said, well, what could we do to make that better?
Well, that does seem to be one thing that could happen is just simply reducing the size of that. To me, less bulkhead is always better. basically, from-
So you mean further back than the 8? kind of?
Well, not so much, you know, the real high priority area is between natural low water and the top of bank. That's where, you know, all the habitat is. So, you know, it's not particularly priority habitat simply under the pond surface. You know, so that isn't a big factor. But that interaction between natural low water, the shoreline, then what becomes a bordering vegetated wetland in the bank, that's the priority and ecologically, in my opinion. And then beyond that, the deck is tough. A lot of times we're, you know, debating whether to have a structure, you know, 57 feet or 60 feet away from the resource. And, you know, this is obviously right in it, so it's not what we would normally consider. I mean, there's already, pulling the house back is a great thing to begin with. We don't currently have a planting plan for the rest of this area within 100 foot. So, I mean, if it's all just going to be essentially lawn, that's maybe not as good as some other alternatives as far as further mitigation. And then, you know, I don't know if we're considering there's 3 lots here, I believe. Certainly in consolidating everything into one area, you know, only having, say, one staircase and allowing the remainder to naturalize is, I would consider significant mitigation.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think what we're trying to say simply is that if the bulkhead's not there, then the mitigation, the plantings, even the wetland that's there now, isn't gonna be there. You know, the shoreline is gonna continue to grow till it gets to the base of the bank. Any of that vegetation that's there now, whether we plant it or not, will be gone. So that the bulkhead is gonna serve to hold that area so that the mitigation plantings and the existing wetland can exist and stay there. Without the bulkhead, it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Just looking at that shoreline, even on, you know, immediately on either side of the bulkhead, there's nice, thriving, you know, bordering vegetated wetland and.
I agree, but that just developed after the storms of this winter. I think we'd have a different conversation after this winter if the same thing happens this winter that happened last winter. We'll find all that.
Well, yeah, it is possible since there's no vegetation there now. It would need a little help to begin with, but it certainly could renaturalize.
I just see the same thing happening again. Mother Nature's in charge here, and we just have to work with it.
Well, and again, you know, we're trying to strike a balance between what was there and just saying, okay, we're going back to just natural shoreline.
Right.
You know, and I'll be honest, most of me at this point feels like I should have just come in and said, I just want to put the bulkhead back where it is and refill it and be done with it. I think we would have had a meeting and a half and we would have probably been done with it because there's so much precedent for it set and people are doing it all over the pond. And I tried to do something to actually improve it. And I feel like it's now, we're pushing, okay, well now we want to take it all away and go right back to natural, which that I don't think would have been the discussion if I said I just want to rebuild the bulkhead in its exact same position as 3 different neighbors have in the last 5 years, and it was approved, I believe, unanimously in each case. But now we're talking about saying, well, we don't know if you should have it at all. It's so they're very different discussions.
In those cases, the bulkheads were still there, though.
They were fundamentally destroyed. I mean, I've been there for the last 12 years. I looked at those bulkheads. I've actually been down on the shoreline in those people's yards. Some of them were literally curbing stacked up, granite curbing that had been just obliterated and fallen down. and they were rebuilt. It's no real different than I'm looking at a pile of wood on the shoreline there after 2 storms in the winter. I mean, it's
Just to be clear, they were built after the storms under emergency action, is that what you're talking
no,
about?
no. They were permitted to be repaired, I mean, and replaced, and with the same type of bulkhead, you know, we're doing now.
A lot of, I don't have them here in front of me, they were just in front of pre-existing structures.
Yeah, those I do not think were in the condition that this one was found in. They were not in that advanced state of disrepair and demolition. I would not say they were that
I mean,
condition.
one of them was, like I said, just stacked block that the water had completely breached. The land was gone behind it, all the way up to the BVW, and we basically were allowed to put a bulkhead around that structure that had become water again and refilled. I mean, that's 2 doors down from me that I lived for 12 years. I mean, I witnessed that firsthand. You know, I understand this structure is down, but it was down for basically a few months. And I could also point to a number of cases where, you know, there's been a couple of pilings or a pier or a couple of dock footings that those structures have been allowed to rebuild that were far more destroyed than this structure. So, you know, I think there is precedent for whether you want to call it grandfathering or allowing structures to be rebuilt. And again, I think, you know, we could point to a number of cases that were approved under that guidance.
I do think it's difficult to ask the present commission to think about that tonight because they were not part of that review. So it's case by case, you know, truly it is. But I understand where you're coming from, absolutely. You know, I can see your point of view, but it is hard for, I think, the present commissioners to understand what those other situations were.
Well, I'll leave my
If
comments
you
at that.
wanna, I can look into them, not a problem.
Yeah, I know,
Meant to.
a few of them, the footprints were basically the same, and they were built out around the existing bulkhead, and they were not quite, in my mind, in the state of disrepair as this one was. But again, this one has different conditions, and so we need to look at this one and evaluate it. Any other questions or comments?
I'll leave my comments at that for now.
Thanks, Jim. Stan?
I have 3 issues, I guess. One is the bulkhead one, I guess, is a tough one for me, because to me, if it's protecting the bank, I don't understand why we wouldn't want to allow that to be built, as opposed to leaving and not build that and then having the bank eroded. And as Jim's made comment, well, it could naturalize. Well, we run into these situations all the time where how do we know what's going to happen? Is it going to or isn't it? We don't have data, I mean, so it's our opinion. So I think the bulkhead, if it's going to protect the bank and from eroding it, I would think I'd be in favor of that. The slope or the path, I'm really not against. I'm not for that one at all. I went back one day and I looked at that, and I'm looking at how steep that bank is, and I know we've talked at the other meetings about, oh, we can put a path in and it won't erode or anything, and it'll be made in such a way that erosion won't occur. But that's a real steep bank there, and I just can't see that in my own opinion happening. And then, Mark, you had mentioned there won't be any fill in there, and then I'm looking at this map at the slope of that bank.
Yeah, you don't have to fill to make that slope. You're cutting.
No, but I'm looking at the angle of this path, the way I'm looking at the map.
Yeah.
And from what I remember picturing that bank, it's almost a sheer drop, so I don't know how you'd cut into that with this angle that I'm seeing on this diagram, how that would even happen without filling it somehow.
It's about a 2 to 1. You could potentially, you know, if you're looking at like that, you're cutting in and bringing the top of the bank further in, is what it boils down to. You're cutting out the top of the bank. But I mean, I certainly see your point, and I understand the position on that. I know it's a different request than probably has come before it, at least in a lot of years.
And the third one, even though I like the idea of the deck, it is putting a new structure in the 0 to 50, which we really don't want to do. So I guess the one of the three, the one I'd probably lean in favor of, maybe with more discussion, is the bulkhead, but the other two I'd be against. That's all I have.
John?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about the deck. And I understand your argument, which is, your point is that if you have the deck there, there'll be less wear and tear on the actual bank. Or, on the other hand, well, there's a couple points about that. One is, it seems a little inconsistent to me with your argument that you need to put back the bulkhead. You need the bulkhead because that's usable land that was there before, and I take it that you were counting on that still being there. So it seems like that land behind the bulkhead, whatever area there is something you intend to use, not just look at. But my real issue is more about the precedent-setting thing. And you have an argument, sort of a general argument, that because you're mitigating, doing all kinds of other mitigation, that the deck is a good idea and it's already being mitigated. However, if we look at the argument that you were just making about precedents for the bulkhead, and you're making statements that we have no way of, in the moment, verifying at all about other people who've put in, replaced bulkheads elsewhere on the pond, it's precisely the problem with precedent. It's, you're pointing to something else that has a different story behind it, had different justifications which can't be recovered, and saying that's a reason why you should be able to put in your bulkhead. And I'm seeing the same problem with the deck. There may be some justification on your part that makes sense for putting the deck in, but that will be lost 3 years down the road when there's different commissioners here, somebody else on one pond comes before the commission and says, that guy has a 200 or whatever it is, 200 square foot deck in front of his property, I should be able to put one in front of mine too. And you know, the subtleties in your arguments won't be there, it'll just be somebody pointing at that. And I think, you know, it's kind of an uphill battle for the commission trying to hold the line on these things. And when precedent gets set like this, it's very difficult to undo that in the future and argue against that in the future. And that's a big reason why I think that deck is not a good idea for us to.
So just, I guess a couple of things to that is that I would point to the fact that the commission is allowed to replace one structure with another and allow for mitigation. I mean, correct? Is that, and that's what we're doing. So I don't think we're setting a precedent of you can just come apply for a deck. I mean, we're setting a precedent that by the way the bylaw works is that we're removing what fundamentally was a deck. I mean, you had a bulkhead with fill behind it. You had a structure that created usable area. We're taking that up, eliminating it, adding vegetation and increasing the BVW in what the bylaw calls for in a 3-to-1 basis, and replacing it with a deck. So it's not as obscure as it would seem in the argument. It's, I mean, I do have some nuances to that argument that I would argue why we should do that. But the fundamental premise behind that deck is relatively simple. I mean, we're taking out that structure, we're taking out the fill behind it, we're adding mitigation, and we're replacing it with deck in a 3-to-1 ratio. The other thing I would throw out here, having, heard all the comments, is two things. One, I would say, if getting rid of the ramp makes us easier to get there and deal with just the bulkhead and the deck, I would certainly be willing to do that. The other, option in my mind is to sort of pull back and, pull back and/or just change it to leaving the bulkhead where it is and filling behind it, which seems a much more straightforward, no ramp, no deck. We fill it and we use that area as it was used for 40 years. And I have no problem with that either. I mean, that's, more than happy to do that. I don't think it's the best option, but if it doesn't set a precedent and it more follows the letter of the law, then, that's certainly an alternative.
Well, I got confused with, you were talking about the deck.
Yeah.
And replacing one structure with the other, so then you were saying, well, do away with the bulkhead, now I got a deck.
No.
Now I was getting confused.
No, well, so what I was saying is I'm kind of looking at two completely different options. If we say, forget about the ramp, let's just focus on if you can use, I don't remember what it was called, but L or I or whatever it was in the bylaw to approve the bulkhead, and then saying that we've moved the bulkhead back 8 feet, that is structure, there was fill behind it, and we're provided for mitigation. We're replacing it with a deck. We allowed 3-to-1 mitigation. We removed structure in the resource area. So it's clean. But if that isn't clean enough, we could also just go to replace the bulkhead exactly where it is under the limited project
Right, you'd
and
still-
fill, and that's it. Forget about the deck, forget about the ramp, and it would just, you'd just fill behind. Well, I wouldn't even mind still putting the mitigation on each side because I think it's a good idea for the pond. But I'm saying I'm trying to use the deck to replace the structure or usable land that's been there for 40 years. But if that doesn't make sense, and as you say, sets precedent, it's an excellent point. I mean, it does get cloudy 5 years from now as to, how that came to be. I don't have any problem going that way either. I'm trying to find a way to move forward so we can get this done that's in the best interest of the pond and quite frankly, I guess to some degree selfishly, is obviously we want to be able to use the property as we had hoped. We've spent a lot of time on the pond and it's fantastic.
All set, John? Yeah. Okay, I'll just go through my thoughts quickly. I think the path, you've heard it. I think it's hard for us to approve it. It's in a no disturb zone, so I feel the same way. With the deck, I feel the same way as well. And I'd take it further by saying it's more than just the regulation and the precedent. You're covering up existing habitat, and so you're going from a situation where you have people using the area, which is great. Use it for 4 months, maybe 5 months, limited activity, but you would be covering it with a deck for 12 months forevermore. And so I think of plants, wildlife, things that would use that habitat, that would be altered. So it isn't just the precedent of putting something in no disturb zone, you're also having a habitat alteration, which I would not support. So I feel is that both the path and the deck should go away, and then we talk about how to get the bulkhead in. And I think we've only seen this determination, since yesterday, I think, right? So I haven't had this morning. So I haven't had a lot of time to sink in, but I do agree with the idea that a property owner should have the ability to replace what you had before, if it's permissible, and it seems like the limited project is a way to do that.
Yes.
So I like what Jim says about natural restoration. I'd love to see that, but I do think I'm tending to think that you have the ability to replace that, given that limited project information that we received. So that's where I'm trending on the bulkhead. Although I wouldn't favor the bulkhead, I'd want to consider it further if you want to keep it in that same outer location. But that's how I'm feeling right now. Pretty hard to vote for the deck or the pathway. but I think it might be too much to ask you to just naturalize that area with, if you really want to replace the bulkhead.
Mhm.
So those are my thoughts briefly. Did you want to come back at all, Mark, or to
Sure.
some comments?
At the end of the day, the object is to better the resource. And looking at the give and take of what's being proposed, I think there's absolutely some benefit. In this particular application, to your point, Brad, about the deck creating an issue, I struggle with that a little bit. I understand your point,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure I can hang my hat on that. To me, that's a tool to manage the degradation of the rest of the property. And I'm inclined to think that that would be a small price to pay to have less disruption in the rest of the area. The path going down the slope certainly can be done, but it's not done without problem. Can be done, but it's not an easy one. I think it's probably better to leave that out of the package. But I would have to be in support of the wall where it's proposed, and I really believe that it's a better opportunity to have the deck in place than not. I would be in favor of reaching for a little more mitigation through that.
Thank you. So, do you want,
I'm sorry, can I just ask Mark what you mean by a little more mitigation?
In the whole planting area,
You're talking about at the bottom for the BBW or on the slope itself?
well, wherever it's available. Now, it's not clear to me in this particular plan right here that the planting is gonna be right up to the wall.
It was proposed to go up to the wall. Correct, I don't know,
In the
Emma, do you
middle?
wanna?
No.
Not in the middle, that was meant to be,
Meant to be open.
open area,
Okay.
right.
My suggestion is to close that up, get a little more growth in there, and if there's a way to increase the growth further back into the slope and build on that, I think that would be advantageous.
To see that in.
Or,
Yep.
I mean, or
You're still talking about taking out those big pine trees. There's pros and cons to that, but if they're replaced with a different vegetation, I don't see that being a terrible thing.
So Mark, if we were adding, you bring it further back to the slope on each side to protect that bank and protect that, come around here, or maybe even bringing it this way.
The more the better, in every direction that you can possibly go. I mean, I understand the fact that you can.
On this, how far back are we talking about this bulkhead going back?
8 feet farther than it was.
my time on this
Perhaps
commission?
it's gonna be protecting like the shoreline.
Larger
Using
size,
the shoreline
larger
that they're gonna be
container size
using.
you could see what I was
shrubs.
pointing
Or
at, I was
whatever.
saying, bringing this back
Shoreline, but also be
Close.
protected.
More of a bush type
to
thing.
the edge and
No, but
maybe
my
adding
point
some
is-
So the
bushes along
reason
the
why
deck.
we've only seeded in that area,
What's going on here?
is because we have existing plantings behind that edge of pond. We don't need to seed in that area because there's stuff already growing in that area.
By the time that wall's put up and the backfill is replaced behind it, whatever's there is not gonna be there.
So we
So we can
certainly,
bring the seed all
we
the way back
certainly
to the
could
edge.
specify to bring these back if there's, anything disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
And you suggesting maybe some larger plantings along the base of,
Wherever there's an available space.
right? Which, I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to. I mean, I guess I would, I would ask if, if we were to remove the slope we were to increase the mitigation, coming, I guess, what would be south, back to the bank, and then adding some larger plantings along the bank to help protect that. With the deck, is that something that,
Is there any proposed fill on the two sides behind the bulkhead?
so that's a loam, right? It's a,
Yeah, that would be the mark.
the fill in the mitigation areas,
It's the,
you were filling that with,
Organic fill. it
organic
says.
fill, right?
Yeah, you'd fill it with compatible soil to be able to plant the plants that you want to plant.
it would be filled to the level of the top of the bulkhead, similar to the, or a bit lower.
Yeah.
I think it
they're
was
only
6
filling
inches, it
within
was 6
6
inches of the
bulkhead.
top.
Down a little bit.
And then that soil, in theory, becomes hydric.
Right.
And then you also have the rocks in front of the bulkhead that reduce,
Right.
scouring.
Okay.
Just throwing this out there, and I won't take credit for this, Dan just thought of it. But, in docks, we use seasonal decking. We have permanent framing and seasonal decking. If we use through flow grading as the decking for this 207 square foot deck, and they had to pop it out after the season, would that be something you would entertain?
Well, let me ask a question, because at one of the previous meetings you meant, which wasn't even being addressed in here, and I was told to leave it out of it, was a dock.
That's another.
I know, that's another issue, so I don't know where that falls into this. And when I see with a bulkhead, are you talking shoreline here? Usable shoreline for things that you
I don't understand.
use it for, as part of your day-to-day activities?
The shoreline.
Well,
Behind the
where you're filling, where
Well,
you're
the,
filling
the,
behind
the,
them.
the idea of this is that I'm trying to concentrate use to the deck and here, eliminating, up until this past summer,
Right.
from here to here was used and destroyed every season. You had 2 cottages, a house, up to 20, 26 people here constantly. When the land was put on the market, there was the potential of 5 individual lots, 5 homes, 5 staircases, 5, docks, the whole 9 yards. So I'm trying to consolidate, the use that has been going on for 40 years across this whole piece into 2 small areas is my plan. So that, you're not using these mitigated areas, and there's no reason to. You have plenty of area to use, and eventually when there is a dock, you would be coming off one of those areas, one of those usable areas, and not, an area that was designed to keep everyone away from.
My thought is that the removable deck would still be a structure in the 0 to 50, and it's not a water-dependent structure where we think about things in terms of temporary application, so it's still a new structure in my mind. So,
And you don't think of that at all as a replacement structure, that we're taking this amount of structure out? I mean, this entire bulkhead, 8 feet by,
you're pushing it inward, though. The bulkhead will return, right?
right, but what was behind that bulkhead is 8 feet wide by
Yeah.
100 and something feet long is being eliminated. I mean, it was clearly structure and land and fill and whatnot. All of that is being taken away and would not return, and you're only replacing it by about 1/3 of that with that structure.
I don't see it being directly related that way. It's a new structure in an area which we say no new structures without a variance. So you're requesting a variance, I understand that, but, my position is that it's a new structure that would impair the habitat that's there. So,
So, sorry.
I'm just gonna say, I think that's, I don't know how far we can go with this. It's been our third hearing, I think.
Yeah.
So
My,
I think we can vote on it the way it is, or we can, ask you to tweak something.
can we talk about the alternative that you've brought up about putting things back where they were? So, I mean, that also would have to, be approved by the board as a limited project. So you do face that same thing, the same hurdle, without the deck, potentially. But I try to think of this, and maybe I'm being too candid here, but I try to think of this going forward. If you were to, and I can understand everybody's point here. Going forward, I think we all understand and want them to continue to have some use of their property out there, and have it reduced from what it was, but also be permittable. I don't think we want to have a challenge in the courtroom. That could be very difficult for us. So, I personally view it as minimization. Is it ideal? I don't think so. It's not putting it back to its natural state, no. But they had something more invasive, in my opinion, just last year than they're proposing here. So that's, so yes, you can vote on, I don't wanna sell the applicant either on this idea of it being easier to just put it back where it used to be. And I think you understand that we might face some of the same questions there.
I don't think anybody wins doing that.
Right, and I would agree. I don't think anybody wins putting it back where it was.
Or maybe not, maybe win is a bad word. I don't see any benefit to doing that.
That's.
I mean,
environmental benefit, put
it
that
doesn't
way.
seem like the majority of the board is there even without the path, is my
My
general
suggestion,
feeling.
if you want to conclude this tonight, would be to remove the deck and the path and have the footprint of the bulkhead where it is. And
So I guess I'm gonna offer out one last sort of olive branch in the middle, and that would be, so if I am eliminating this deck and I've given up area behind here, I guess what I would like to do is sort of split the difference of where the bulkhead was and where we're proposing. Which it was coming back 8 feet, we bring it back 4 feet. We keep the mitigation on each side, but it just gives a little more area to deal with, and we've eliminated the structure that seems to be a major hurdle.
Well, yeah, to me, it doesn't really make much difference whether it's once you're out into the water and there's so it's not really detrimental to move it back out that amount. I suppose that would give us some additional BVW mitigation.
It would
on
give
each
additional
side.
BVW on each side, right?
That's kind of seems like a good compromise.
The problem with compromising that is you're filling in part of the pond to gain a few plants.
There's plenty of pond.
Only room for the plants going
That's
back.
the biggest one I've ever had.
Remember that.
I mean, obviously, you know what my first choice is, but I also don't, we can go round and round on this. I firmly believe what I was proposing is the best for the pond. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't propose it. I'd come up with something else. I mean, it's one of the best places on earth for us, and my wife and I have agreed to spread our ashes there at some point, but I don't even think that's legal, but anyway, off the record. But, so I do care about the pond a lot, and I really wish you would see it the way I see it, and understand how that shoreline gets used, and how important a deck is, and whatnot. I would you know, obviously be thrilled if you could come to that conclusion and we leave it where it is and we eliminate the path. And I firmly believe it's in the best interest of the pond. If you couldn't come to that conclusion, and I understand the arguments of why and whatnot, if we can split the difference on the bulkhead, at least that gives us a little bit more usable area and gives me a little bit more room to work, so I don't have to worry about people trampling BVW and, you know, whatnot. It's, I guess that's where I am on it.
I would follow just to say that I think probably the best thing for the pond is what Jim has proposed, which is to naturalize that shoreline. And that's what I'd love to see. I'm very familiar with the shoreline here in Long Pond, but I think that you may have a right to rebuild that bulkhead. That's kind of what I'm reading from our legal advice. So that's why I think that I'm trending in that direction myself.
You can go on Google Earth and see it there, just plain as day a year ago.
Yeah, it was there.
I would feel differently as well if it was there 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, it
a
was-
year ago.
it was there,
So I
and-
think it would be an uphill battle
Right.
to.
Well, how do you want to structure this? Do we need to see new plans before we can vote?
I think
Do we-
you need a sense of the commission to even go that way, so if we were to split the difference and then get a sense of the commission.
I just want one
Sorry.
question on the bulkhead, though, is to putting it where it presently is, or would it be moved back?
We'd be proposing to pull it back
No,
4
but
feet instead of 8.
No, I understand.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry?
Would it have to, I mean, based on what you had talked about before, would it have to be where it was, or back 8 feet, or 4 feet? Or-
I would say, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not DEP judge.
Right.
They would most likely be able to keep it in the place they were, or landward, so just not seaward of where they
So,
originally had it.
where it was, or inland?
We would have a right to
From it.
propose where it is.
Right.
It could be denied. The appeal
Right.
would
Okay.
likely,
So what
we would
you're-
win.
okay, no, I'm just trying
and,
to, I'm just trying
you
to
know,
picture
no,
what
I'm
we're
just saying, I mean,
actually-
and believe me, that's the last thing on earth
And the
I
resource
want to
would
do
not
is go
benefit.
through any of that.
And the resource would benefit
Correct,
from it.
correct.
Basically, anywhere from where it was
Right.
to where we're
So,
proposing
and
now.
well, we've
is
been
further
talking about
back.
8 would be in effect where the shoreline is
Mm.
out of water. And the 4 feet would be filling in a little bit of the pond,
Right.
is what we're talking
It's roughly where the observed
It's
water
4
level
feet
is.
back from where it was.
Right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Which might be in the still in the water at this point, is
Presently.
what I'm trying
It's
to
at the-
picture.
It would be
Right.
at the observed water level of where this
Right, but-
plan was taken, about.
We've heard that we're at water levels that are quite high.
Right.
And we've heard the precipitation levels in some regions, it's a 50-year, peak. So, yeah, I think under average years or low water years, you're gonna have lots of shoreline there, and the naturalization would be fantastic, but it's not what they're proposing, so I think it sounds like a compromise.
I'd like to say that I support that compromise, the 4 feet back, no deck, no path.
Same here.
Anything we do is gonna be a compromise of some sort or another. So I don't see the benefit in putting this off any further, because I don't know that I doubt we're gonna get any further along and find some solution to this issue. So if there's a compromise that is more or less acceptable to everybody, I think we should go for it.
We'd still need to see a revised
But
plan.
I would ask that, just based in the interest of time, and, we would like to repair this, obviously, before we're hitting a time when we can't, that the board would vote on this, hopefully in favor, with the caveat that, on an informal basis, plans are submitted to
Well, they have to
exactly
do them
what
anyways,
we,
yeah.
right, to exactly what we have agreed to. Because it is a very simple change on this. It's basically pulling it in 4 feet, and that's it, other than, eliminating the
Would it be,
deck and path.
so my question
Mhm.
for that, if you're pulling the bulk, if you're splitting the difference
Yeah,
here.
the mitigation would continue out to
mitigation
the,
would
to
continue
the
up
bulkhead.
To the wall,
Correct.
and that, most landward part would stay where it's proposed.
Correct.
So you
That's
get-
all I wanna know.
Yeah.
You get three more feet of mitigation.
That's
out-
all,
Mhm.
that's all I
Mhm.
wanna know what's coming.
Okay.
I'm fine with that
Okay,
if
well,
you are.
let's put out a motion in that regard, under the understanding that we would receive plans, you know, before we issue the order of conditions.
They would, yeah.
Right.
See plans next week.
Right, right.
Okay. Somebody wanna tackle that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent for 85 Subquantum Road, bulkhead boathouse reconstruction. And that will be with, on receipt of revised plans showing the elimination of the deck and the on-grade pathway and the bulkhead going out towards the lake, 4 feet.
4 feet.
Okay.
Didn't ask anybody else in the audience.
Oh, we're in the middle of a motion.
Yeah,
You'd
we're-
have to have a second.
Yeah, we need a second.
I'll second.
So John seconded it, we can have discussion if there is any. Any comments from the audience at this time? Okay. All right, no further discussion, then all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging in there for multiple meetings.
Glad to see it wrap up. Sorry, Mr. Chair, 2-minute break.
Sure.
All right.
Well, let's hope you don't get another winter like the last one. How's that?
We're talking about pretty bad weather coming up, so.
Well, that last March was exceptional.
It's a beautiful spot, no
Any
matter.
good settlement is, everyone's not exactly happy. That's what they say, or something to that effect. I think the spot's nice enough that it'll overcome any downfall of not having.
Time cures everything.
That's true. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
you. Good evening.
You too.
Oh, the float, okay.
Oh, yeah, I didn't have this when we were looking at it, so yeah, there are the posts out there, yeah, on the outside, yeah.
Is there a sketch, there's another sketch there that shows, he's also putting in another pile.
I thought we'd see the elm treatment back in there too, so we're kinda lucky, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a big one.
All right, Amy.
Good.
So next, we have a notice of intent for 67 Lowe County Road, proposal to add an additional float to an existing licensed dock.
Good evening. You guys all have copies of that plan?
Mm-hmm.
State your name and your project.
Bob Thomason, and property's on Herring River, just below Lower County Road. And it's been in the family for 65 years. We've had a dock there most of the time. It's been permitted for the last almost 20, I think, with the state. And the float that's on there now is a standard float that's 8 by 16. And what we want to do is add another float to it that's 4 by 16, so we'll have more room to put a couple small boats. The family's grown over the years, and everyone's grown up there
loving the water and the boats, and that's what it's all about. It's a summer house. So we've, over the years, collected more boats, a 16-foot and an 18-foot runabout. And so the idea is to have the narrow float, have a boat on each side. So one would be close to the shore. And we met with Waterways, and their concern was not going out into the channel, and this doesn't do that. The float would be going up towards the bridge. And there's deep enough water there. I guess I've talked to, I guess it's 3 or 4 different guys that build floats. So I've talked to them all about how to do it. And one suggested that we could attach that narrow float to the existing float using the same pilings that are there. But I wasn't too convinced of that because there's a pretty strong tide there and the current's really strong. So we really need one more piling at the end of the 16-foot float. So there'd be 2 separate sections, and they're bolted together when they're being used during the season. And of course, it's a seasonal float. They're both taken out in the fall and kept up on the property. And that's pretty much it. We also use it, everyone in the family swims. We're always swimming in the river. So it offers a nice little protected area for the children to swim in that area, be away from the river traffic and whatnot. And there's a ladder on there on the float to swim and come back out. Any questions? That's pretty much it.
All right, thank you. Amy, any thoughts?
Just a couple quick things. There's about 5 feet of water at mean low water there, where they're proposing. It really drops off really quick. Bob, would the new pile, so this is a notice of intent. It's not like a change in plan or anything. This is a notice of intent, so I think it's one pile is reasonable to ask for. Would it be a, your typical 8-10 inch diameter pile, or would it be a pipe pile?
Well, it was suggested that we could possibly use a pipe, sort of as a smaller pole. But there's ice in the river sometimes, and over the years, some years we've had the whole dock ripped out with the ice. The pilings that are in there now, they've been there about 20 years, they are about 10 inches in diameter, and they haven't moved at all. So my personal feeling is one shot, put a good piling in there and just be done with it, rather than having to worry about it getting ripped out in the ice, or trying to put it in seasonally every year. It's real soft mud. It's probably gonna have to be a 20 or 22-foot piling and go down about 6 or 8 feet into the mud. So I think that's probably the best solution for it to be.
It's a one-time disturbance. So he's still, with his floats, both cumulatively are still under the 200 square foot maximum that we have, and that's what a lot of people have. He would have to file for an amendment with Chapter 91, because your license, which is the plan that we're working off of, that you sketched off of, shows something very specific. Hopefully it's just very simple and a change in plan. I can direct you to the right people.
With the state, you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can direct you to the right people for an amendment with that. But I would recommend approval of the one new pile, traditional pile, and the float extension as proposed.
Thanks, Amy.
Oh, it also went to Waterways, and they signed off on it with no questions, so.
Yep. Just to
This is a
confirm it.
sketch, if you
Yep.
wanna see it.
Yep. Just to confirm, it'd be a total of 192 square feet?
Correct.
That's the amount?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Any questions around the table?
I have none.
No? Jim?
None for the moment.
Okay.
No.
Stan? No? John?
No questions.
Okay. Just look at the plans, it sounds like the landward side of the existing float is over 2.5 feet, or is it?
Oh, it's 5, yeah, it's like 5.5.
The diagram, it's hard to derive that, but from the elevations. Okay, well, that's good. And, yeah, I can't help but say I like your Lyman. I see it all the time. It's a fantastic boat. You keep it in good shape.
Well, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
My father's boat, and
Wow.
He bought it new in '66. And,
Wow.
we have a hard time parting with it. So,
It's a beauty. It really is.
thank you.
And
It's a lot of work, and it's been for sale for the past 3 years, but apparently no one wants to buy a 50-year-old wood boat. So.
There you go, Brad.
I had a 21, and it was a ton of work, years and years, and I had it for a long time. I loved it because it just gains so much water weight and just rides better than any fiberglass boat ever could.
It's a great ride.
Yeah. And we pay attention to the off-season storage of floats, and I will say that I always see yours up on the property away from the resource area, so we appreciate that. That's a plus.
There's a couple other people we gotta, in that area we gotta talk to.
Yes, yeah. All right, well, I think we can move forward. Did you want to come back, or any
No, I
comments?
don't have any.
Okay. All right, we can take a motion.
Okay, I'll make
Is
a
there
motion.
anybody?
Any comments from the audience?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Please announce your name.
Maureen County, I live around the corner. I'm part of Trinity Cove.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know, first of all, why we do not all get certified letters at this meeting.
So as required, the applicant is required only to notify people by law within 100 feet of the project, the project of 67 Lower County. They were required, and I have to
Where does
see,
67 Lower County come from?
that's actually, so that's the address where the dock is. It's, so if you wanna look
Yeah,
here.
it's next to
Yeah.
Trinity Cove.
Right, so people, and I don't have to look at your abutter
You have to go
notification
down by the side
file.
of the bridge to get down there.
Right, so essentially from this
Well, you'd have to
property,
land on his property to get there.
We own 2 separate lots.
I know you do.
so all I can say is that he was,
I'd like to know in front of the water, as you go into the river, there's a chain going across it. It's been there for many years.
Okay.
I'd like to know why it's there, where did it come from?
I do not know that.
Is that a right-of-way?
No, it's a private property.
It's a private property?
What's a private property? The entrance to the river is not yours. It is not private property. You do not own that. Everybody in Trinity Cove has it in their deed that we can't access that with our boat.
Well, I will say that this is really beyond the purview of this particular application, so
But why would I want to see you pass this when he doesn't even know where his land is?
that's a different issue entirely.
So where is the map? How do we know where this ramp is going, this
It's
extra
right-
one?
Well, we have in the application.
You have it, but we don't, and we live there.
Well, I think you're mostly interested about a different subject beyond the additional float, so I would say maybe you can discuss it with the
No, I
proponent.
can't discuss anything with him. He's not interested to talk to anybody.
Well,
It's very rude the last time I saw him.
So
Well-
these are the people who were, he was required to notify anybody within 100 feet
Right.
of the project site, and we have the mailing slips. I mean, I wasn't prepared for this right this second, but, you know, you have your green cards, because that
Well,
is a
we-
requirement.
We sent it to all the people that were abutters within, it's 100 feet of the property, or 150 feet, and we notified everyone.
I have the slips, but the slips are only marked with the towns. And you do have your abutter list. I
Yep.
could see if you put that with your application here. That is a requirement. Second here.
I actually heard from our immediate neighbors, and they all spoke in favor of it, and asked if they needed to write a letter of support, and I told them I didn't think that was necessary.
So we should have had a copy of your abutters list with your application.
Yeah, I've got it here somewhere, I've got so many things.
If we could have a copy of that for the file, I just have the recording sheets, but I don't have a way to
here it
cross-reference
is.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is from the assessor's department, what they
Yes.
were required to do. If you'd like to see it, you're more than welcome to.
And here's the, this is also, shows the people that.
The radius he had to do.
The pertinent properties that we notified.
Okay?
So I think we're okay to go forward.
Okay.
He satisfied the notification requirements to abutters.
Well, he has that list. I do have his slips. I just didn't have a list to correlate them to,
Right.
but they're all stamped. A whole bunch of them.
Okay, and
Assuming yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
How come, how come, what was it, number 5? Wasn't, notified George Lane's house? Or maybe it is, maybe that's what it is. Can you answer me that?
Oh, you're speaking to me?
Yeah, I'm speaking.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
It's right beside me. I said, is George Lane's house on this?
Yes, it is.
Which one is it?
It's a new owner there, and, yes, Peter Barron.
Okay, well, if they've satisfied the notification requirements, I think we should go forward with a motion.
So I'd make a motion for the notice of intent for 67 Lower County Road for an additional float to the existing licensed stock and the additional piling.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Mark, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate your time.
And if you could have those, that would be much appreciated.
The copy she has?
Yes, when she's done.
Okay.
If you'd like a copy of those for your own records, I can't do it right this second because we're in a meeting, but I'm happy to get those to you if you call us, okay?
So now when did Gene take it now?
I don't know whose it is.
Before stuff, the land.
I can look
What do we
into
do?
that, but as far as, why don't you write down your name and number, and I'll be happy to try to follow up with you and put you in the right direction. You actually fit right on top of here, okay? Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know, so,
You have to see the site.
yeah. Oh, I went to the site, no, I saw the change, but I didn't know it was an issue, so I don't know whose it is. Yeah.
And it's been there.
Yeah, we don't really have jurisdiction over that, but I can get you, turn you in the
I
right
wasn't
direction.
either.
Okay, I'd like to announce the next hearing. It's a notice of intent for 119 Julian Road, demolition of existing dwelling and construction of a new dwelling to be elevated above the floodplain.
Good evening, David Clark Engineering, and I'm a Vautour from Blue Flats Design, and Mark Molesky, one of the owners, is also here tonight. We made several revisions after the last hearing. The Commission asked us to remove the lattice work from underneath the deck and prepare a plan show that in more detail. I did prepare a section through the building, and the architect also revised her plans to show that the lattice was being pulled back. And so what we did, that gave us an opportunity to do some dune nourishment underneath the deck. So you'll see on the section plan that additional material is being brought in so that we can restore the habitat there, and Emma can speak to that. Blue Flags also revised their plan to additional plantings in that area. The Commission also asked us to clarify the site coverage, both existing and proposed, so that numbers are the total numbers are the same, but each category is identical as far as existing versus proposed, so you can compare more easily. So if there's any questions, which one, Emma can go through the changes to the blue packs design if you like.
Thank you. Let's see, anything you want to tell us up front, Amy, or should we
Well,
hear the plan?
Yeah, let's talk
Yeah.
about the changes.
Okay.
Sure, and why don't since I wasn't at the last hearing really briefly, I'll just go over, we're managing invasive species in all the areas shaded in yellow. We're proposing to remove the gravel and hardscape from all the areas shaded in green on the planting plan, replacing those with sand and native plantings. We're planting 92 native shrubs and 4 native trees. And elevating the house out of the flood zone is obviously a benefit to the resource area. And then in terms of changes to our plan, removing the breakaway panels, as David just talked about from the, or the paneling from around the deck, to allow sand to move laterally underneath the deck. And in doing that, we've also rerouted the path along the west side of the house. So on this side of the house, the path is now just coming in here. That means we're getting additional plantings along the west side of the house, further increasing the mitigation, which is already greater than 3-to-1 across the property. And we're also going to be planting right up to the edge of deck, so there's no longer a path along the edge of coastal dune in that area, right along the deck. And that summarizes our changes.
Thank you. You have any comments for us, Amy?
Yep. Let's see, first, so, I mean, I wrote you a summary about how, it's coming up to flood. It's a new building, it's gonna be a flood compliant building in a very high hazard area. They are right on the beach, pretty much. So that is a huge benefit, to the site is, during the event of a storm, the house won't be damaged. It also won't cause damage to abutting properties in the event of a storm. The naturalization as proposed is really good. So in general, I'm in favor of this project. The only part, and this is what I sent an email around about the concern that, so you are getting bigger within the 0 to 50, pretty much everything's in the 0 to 50 here. But you are also getting closer to the wetland. So, and that is where the retaining wall closest to the marsh on the northeast side, or the east side of the property is currently now the closest hard structure is really the patio, and that's about 20 feet away, and the proposed retaining wall for what I'm assuming is a drive under.
There's a wall still there.
There's a wall still there?
There's a wood wall.
Okay.
You just
It
can't
just
see it
didn't
because it's
reflect.
all overgrown.
Is the wood wall where the
The rock.
proposed wall is supposed to be?
If you have a drawing of
This-
the
I have
original
ex-
plot,
I have existing right here.
and you would see, this is the wall. Is this the existing
That's
blue stone?
existing, yep.
This is a wall. right
Yep.
here.
So if the wall is right here though, you're still proposing to go out that much farther with a new wall.
Oh, okay.
This is
I just know there's a wall.
Yeah, it is closer to that marsh.
It's a wood wall overgrown, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it'd be fully hardscaped with this proposal.
correct. Well, and also closer to the
Right.
marsh than that wall is, even though it exists. So we do allow variances for things that are bigger. It's really not the intent to go bigger and closer in terms of hardscape. So I assumed it was to be able to drive under. Is that why you needed it there?
Yeah,
But if it could
was.
be reduced, or if we could find another way to do that, that's my biggest comment on this. It is really, hopefully a small change that can be looked at.
We looked into that, and one of the things my calculations don't show is all that stone on the west side of the property. We didn't count it as hardscape because it's a pervious surface, it's not like a patio, but it's not naturalized either. And that's anywhere from 700 to 800 square feet. That's not included in our site coverage calculations, but it is an area that Emma shows on her plan that's gonna get restored.
Mhm.
So as far as increases, if you count that stone area, there's actually a net reduction in site coverage. That doesn't
The
address
closer
your.
part, especially with
Closer
the marsh, which tends to
Um,
move sometimes.
If we dropped the elevation of the garage by half a foot, we could get rid of the wall.
Okay,
So we'd still have that pervious surface.
Which
but we
could be
would-
offset
but we-
by the other one,
We wouldn't
hopefully.
need the wall. We would slope it down at 5%
to me, that would be helpful, especially if you are, getting rid of gravel or whatever over here and putting it, the wall is new structure, so.
I would add to that, we would need a curb along the edge of that. It could be a pervious, something that would let water through, but we would need some kind of curb to keep vehicles from
from going.
passing over that line, yeah.
But other
And no
than
wall.
this little small portion of the project in the grand scheme of things, oh, by the way, I should have mentioned the planks. The owner and I had a chat about the planks over the marsh right before the meeting, and it's not his. We don't have to say who it is in the middle of this meeting,
It was built on your property.
but it's on town property.
It's on town property, so
Yeah.
I'm all right.
But yeah, no, it's not, wasn't them who
Nope.
did it.
Didn't do it, don't want it.
So we will deal with that, separately. If it needs to come out, the town can take it out. We'll just check things again.
Well,
like
they
these
tied
ones.
it down to my fence though, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't float away.
It is pretty well secured, I will say that.
Okay, so I don't know.
All right. Well, but just wanted to let you know it
But
wasn't.
we don't know who built it,
We
right?
don't. It wasn't the owner.
Right.
Of this property. Just wanted to throw that out there. So, I'll pass on that for now, everything else.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Any comments, starting with you, Mark?
No?
Jim?
So would that be the change in plans to eliminate that wall and put in a stone curb or?
We could either do granite or
Yep.
whatever they could come up with.
And then, so underneath the decks at this point, I haven't come across the elevation or the section yet. That's essentially just a dune and maybe some plants will grow under there.
It's mostly gonna be sand, and the point is to allow the sand to move laterally, but
Yeah.
not to allow it to accumulate in that area. And it, yeah,
And getting rid of the lattice, if something wants to grow there,
Right.
it has an opportunity now.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Jim. Stan?
No, I'm all set.
Jim? Us, John, sorry.
Get a bit of joy.
Sorry about that.
It's late.
It happens close to 9 o'clock.
I don't really have any questions, I just want to clarify though. And here over on the east side, where the wall under discussion is, the edge of the actual building is there, is that right? So
This is the
this is an
building in the
open, but this area here is
It's
all,
open, yes.
that's driveway, pervious surface.
Pervious, yeah. Some of which is patio right now.
And also, just to satisfy my curiosity, there's this thing that looks like a path that goes through the structure. I don't know, I have no idea what
Those
that
are the
is.
Oh, those are-
topo lines,
yeah, those
topography
are-
Oh, those,
lines.
oh, they're that regular?
See how,
Oh,
how
I
it,
see, it's showing the
doesn't
top
show
of
on
the dune.
this,
Okay,
but-
I get it.
yeah, that's
Oh, they've
the,
got,
how high it is here,
okay,
believe it or not.
wow. Okay.
And then it dips down to nothing.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
It does look like they're putting an indoor
It-
track in.
Does look way too regular to be topo lines, but okay,
That's it?
that's it.
Okay, I guess I'll go through a couple things. So if you pull back that wall, do we still have an increase in site coverage? X square feet.
If we count the stone on the west side of the house, there's a net reduction. I don't know what the exact number is, just scaling it, there's 700 to 800 square feet of gravel stone
Right.
on the west side of the house.
So
I
all
think
this,
Teresa presented pictures last time of that, yeah, so
And-
that's where
and-
Amy's from.
it's all gravel there.
Right, but,
You
and
get
so,
rid of it.
right, but so the spot where you're gonna, propose to put in the wall, you're calling that existing hardscape?
No.
That's not existing
No,
hardscape?
there's vegetation there that we're proposing to remove to allow access under the building.
No, I guess in your calculations, I
Oh,
guess
that is counted in the calculations.
as hardscape presently,
As proposed hardscape, yeah.
as proposed, but how about existing? Because it,
Only the portion that's patio now. So you'll see that half-circle line is the limit of vegetation now.
You have to look at it on the site plan.
yeah, I
Which
guess
is
what
very
I'm getting at,
existing.
I think that this is not a site that should have any increase in square footage of hardscape from existing in the 0 to 50. It's a site that's right on the resource area, so you have a right to rebuild, but to have any increase would trigger a variance, and I would not support that. It seems to me it's a case where we should be pulling back if possible, and we talked about that the last hearing, and it seems like you weren't able to find any way to pull that deck back a little bit. So that's why I'm concerned about having any increase in the 0 to 50. I think that's not something the commission should be supporting, even though we're kind of shuffling around hardscapes here, it seems. I don't know if other folks feel the same way.
I can provide a calculation showing that there's a net decrease in coverage if we include the stone on the west side of the.
Right, but with the plans now, they're not included, so right?
It's not included, right.
Right.
And that was my decision in that it's not traditional hardscape.
Right.
But it functions as hardscape in that it suppresses
Right.
vegetation.
Well, the hardscape I'm most interested is the deck space. It does look like you're increasing deck overall from 650 to 922. So I guess I'll ask again now with the proponent here, is there potential to bring that deck back a little bit? Right now, it's sitting right on the dune. Can we achieve a neutral square footage change from proposed to existing by pulling that deck back just a little bit, 3, 4 feet?
The reason why the deck got bigger is that we have that patio space where we're proposing the driveway now to get under. That is a really impervious surface, and that space will basically be lost in that the house has to come up so high, it's not really practical to use that patio anymore. So the architect worked with Mr. Molesky to try to incorporate that area into the deck. So we're trading surfaces, basically. We're taking out the patio and creating deck up on the higher level. So there's a net improvement to the resource area and the buffer zone because we're getting rid of the patio and changing it to deck, which is elevated, and we got rid of the lattice. So there's still room for wildlife movement through there and an opportunity for some vegetation to colonize underneath that deck.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just stress at the end, when it's all said and done, ecologically speaking, we are going to have a large net improvement on the site based on all the vegetation work that's being done, based on the house being elevated, and the number of new plantings that are going in. We are removing that oil tank, is that correct also?
Yes.
The oil tank is coming out of the flood zone. So overall, the sheer number of improvements that are being made, I think overall it's gonna be a real benefit.
Right. So I guess how can I get some comfort that we are not going to increase that footage existing?
I can provide a.
I think it's pretty important. I know it sounds like we're just trying to get the numbers to work, but I just don't think that I mean, Amy, in your site summary, you did suggest it was a 497 increase.
Right, using the, well, that was based on your coverage
Yes.
calcs, so, yeah, if they revise them,
Are you-
yes, that is an increase.
Right.
Shown as an increase.
And I don't think we should support an increase in this case, despite these, there are some benefits here. Again, it's a chance to pull the structure back. You're rebuilding everything, so it's a chance to pull this off the dune a little bit, right? And it's
Hard with the site setbacks the setbacks on the site to move it too much.
so we're gonna, I mean, right now, that footprint isn't gonna change, right? The seaward boundary of the house is not gonna change.
Correct.
Yeah. I think it's too bad. It's an opportunity, I think, to pull it back and reduce impacts to that dune right there.
But I think elevating it does more than for the dune the coastal processes than
I agree, but
moving it back.
but that's a requirement, right? You have to elevate it.
Yes, given the scope of the project, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not us that's saying that you should do that, for the benefit of the resource area, you have to do it. I'm saying that you have a chance to pull it back and reduce that traffic and activity right on the dune. And I understand that you're entitled to rebuild an existing footprint. That's allowed. So I just want to be sure we're not increasing that square footage in the 0 to 50 at all.
That calculation. And use that stone.
Can I just clarify with you, Brad? I mean, what's being stated is that there's a bunch of what is effectively hardscape that's being replaced by planting on the west side. And if you include that in their calculations, which they didn't originally, there's a net gain as opposed to a net loss. So are you
No, the other way.
objecting to that, that equivalence? Are you objecting to taking that replacement of the stone, pervious stone on the west side of the existing structure and counting that replacement with plantings as part of the total hardscape calculation?
Not necessarily objecting, trying to understand it, because it's not explicit right now. We're just learning tonight.
That's the way I took it,
Wait.
that he wasn't objecting, he just wants to document, he wants
Well,
to document.
and I guess I have a question, because you mentioned you didn't include it because it wasn't,
It was, it's.
I guess
yeah.
my
It's
question is
pervious.
it really hardscape, based
It's
on what we're talking
disturbance.
about?
It's marginal, and
Yeah.
the
It's
plans
not
don't,
naturalized.
the
Right.
plans just show that you've got, what's gonna go in there for plantings, right where that stone is. You've got a little,
I agree.
What the,
He needs to calculate
Right.
the square footage
So-
that he didn't
Well,
include.
he already
Right.
has the numbers. he
because
just
all
didn't write 'em
all
down.
of your proposed driveway, when it had the big
he said
retaining
about
wall around it,
700
even if that was a
feet.
pervious driveway, that was all covered in your calculations.
Yes.
So that's gravel. The other thing was gravel, but it wasn't accounted for, so that's all we.
Yeah, if you look at page 5 in the land management plan, there's a really clear photo of the gravel area on the west side, and for all intents and purposes, it really looks and functions like hardscape. That's a good illustration of what we're talking about.
And so what will be planted right there where that,
That'll be replaced with sand and beach grass and bearberry planted on the edges.
And how about the vegetation just to the west of the gravel part? What is that?
Currently,
Invasive?
currently it's invasive. There's an edge on the planting plan that's shaded in yellow. Those are all invasive vines, mostly Asiatic bittersweet, climbing up that cedar tree.
That's
And so-
all going away, and that's already
Yep.
part of this plan, the
Correct,
planting plan.
yeah, that's all being replaced by natives.
any further questions?
No,
Okay. I guess I'd just like to state that I would greatly prefer mitigation on this site to take the form of pulling back from the resource area as opposed to removing invasive plants. It's a nice benefit. it's not the same to me to moving off the dune, so I just think it's just a comment that I'll make. Otherwise, if we're ready for a motion.
Well, do we need the square footage that you were looking
Right.
for?
Well, that's a case of modifying the plan, right? And,
No, it's
that's
defining the square footage that he didn't include in the numbers.
That's the confusion we have.
well,
He was saying the 700 or 800 feet, he didn't know
right,
exactly.
right, and so he's gonna modify the numbers to correct for that, right?
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
do
it's
that.
up to you if you're comfortable doing that, like just telling him, like voting without knowing that for certain.
Right, that's-
Oh.
Or if you want to continue to have those numbers before you vote.
Any preference? I don't have a strong preference.
I'll just say that I don't have a problem with the plan the way it is, understanding what I think I understand about what's happening
Yeah,
here.
well, the plan shows a net increase of 500 square feet, and that's basically driveway increase. I am very comfortable just scaling it, that we're at least 700 square feet in that
The other
gravel
way.
area.
So it'd be a net loss of a couple hundred,
Disturbance.
I
or
understand
net
that.
reduction, not
Yeah.
loss. I mean.
Yep.
It's up to you, so,
Yeah, we've met,
You
it's
have
our
to-
second hearing or third?
second hearing.
Second hearing, so it's, you know, I don't have a problem if you move forward. It depends if, you know, if you really want to see it. I think that if they,
You'd see revised plan, you'd see the calcs anyways before we issued the orders, so,
Yeah.
if we were to vote in.
I'm not hearing a lot of concern otherwise, so
Yeah.
I don't have a problem if folks,
Okay.
you know, if more folks felt like I did, then I think maybe we could continue. But if the applicant would like to settle this tonight, then that's probably the way to go.
Your pleasure.
Yeah,
So
no.
as far as a revised plan before you issue the order,
Next week, please, Wednesday, sorry.
you'd want the calcs revised,
Yeah.
so it's part of the record,
Yep.
and a note that the retaining wall becomes a curb.
Right, that you're reducing the fill essentially from
Yeah.
3 feet to about 1.5, where you can slope it to, yeah. That, so that the seaward edge, if you will, doesn't change location, doesn't get any closer to the marsh though,
Okay.
okay?
Okay, do we have a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the notice of intent for 119 Julian Road, demolition and construction of a new dwelling.
Second?
Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Dave, if you could, actually, our next meeting, when we're doing the issues, is 5 Wednesday a month, so we don't, I would do the next, and then the Wednesday prior, so.
Yeah, the reasoning in that previous meeting was that this existing septic there
It'll be
at the setback.
January.
That was one of the reasons for not pulling
So
back.
if I could have them by January 30th?
Because there's septic and everything, yeah.
I know, it's
And then that could be moved to,
sitting on it,
yeah.
and they didn't give an inch.
I won't be here next week anyway, so.
I-
Just designed it differently.
It's,
I don't think they've got the
My
inch to
house,
give though, Brad.
working on house project.
I think they really pushed the square footage, and in the end, it's calling this, that it wasn't called hardscape before,
Right, thank you.
you know? And then, now they're calling it hardscape. So, it's a shame. I mean, that, right on the dune, they couldn't pull back. I think it's our responsibility to find ways to reduce those impacts.
I
And-
don't know if they weren't getting closer to it, if we could have made them do that, you know, legally. If it was held up.
It's tough. I just have trouble with mitigation in the form of invasive plant removal when you got a deck on the dune.
Yeah,
I mean, really.
it's concerned the invasives.
But either way,
would-
I think, you know, we all had, you know,
Well, that's good to elevate it. I believe it's elevated 6 or 8 feet, so the dune can kind of
But also
migrate.
get rid of the
that's not a
lattice.
Wetlands Protection Act issue.
Yeah.
right? That's not ours, that's.
Well,
that's
well,
some-
no,
it
it just
is.
may
It's
not
both. It's-
improve the
Yeah.
habitat a little bit anyway. Getting rid of that lattice so the dune
Oh,
can.
huge.
Because
Yeah.
when you look under those elevated structures on the dunes, that you actually do get a little vegetation under
I,
there.
I could,
edges
I could see a little
particularly.
bit,
I mean,
yeah.
some anyway.
But you'll step off that deck and you're right on
They're on the dune.
beach grass.
But when you, moving the lattice, I mean, I'm in fit.
Because wasn't the lettuce gonna be right at the edge of the deck?
Oh, yeah, the lattice
So
was
by
gonna go from the
removing
deck
yeah.
down to the house and essentially would have prohibited a lot of sand
Right.
movement and, it just becomes, in storm events, if you look at what has happened down south especially, if you see these houses that are on piles that have this breakaway foundations or these lattices, they just become absolute disasters. I mean, they work for people to contain their stuff during the season, but they just make a huge mess and damage other properties.
That's
when
kind of
they
a
break out.
workaround of that law.
It is-
you know,
oh, absolutely.
Because a lot of them now, you can barely tell that they're breakaway, and I think they become not breakaway.
Well, and then we've
Lot of
seen,
those.
not in Harwich, because we don't have a lot of houses that have to be on pilings in Harwich,
Yeah.
but in other towns in the Cape, we had, one where they put a bedroom and a bathroom down there.
Yeah.
It becomes usable space
My,
for all
my,
intents and
s-
purposes,
my son and
you know,
daughter-in-law's
seasonal
uncle, they
groom.
have two
Oh,
homes.
yeah.
Her uncle has
It's just like
places right
camping.
on, down in Rhode Island. I mean, it looks like a cement foundation around, but they're breakaway
Yeah.
technically.
But once you have the walls up,
Yeah.
who can see what you're actually doing inside
Right,
there to
right.
improve it?
Yeah.
That's
So-
true.
I mean, they weren't proposing walls, they were lattice, but still. We got a couple of certs of compliance. So first one for 2 Wasson, for Jonathan Vanica. It's, work was never done, so, my guess is, they're trying to sell the property, I'm not sure exactly, Nikki checked on this one. But, it was for raised dwelling, reconstruct new site improvements, new septic, and they didn't do any of it. So we're recommending a cert of compliance for work not done.
Okay. You wanna do them all at once, or?
Sure, we can. The town one is a little bit more involved. So 8 Cranberry Hollow, was for a view corridor, very modest view corridor, as Nikki stated, everything's vegetated, recommends a cert. And then the town, to be honest, I haven't read this yet, because it's been so insane. Building appears to be, alright, so it's rotated from its position, but it's farther away from the water. So she's recommending a certificate. We have an as-built site plan for that, showing it, and it's different. Just, they rotated it instead of being parallel, it's further end. Wish they hadn't done that without notifying us, but in the grand scheme, I guess if it's farther away, it's a better thing. It's the same size.
Yeah.
So I recommend a yes, or a certificate for all 3 of them.
Okay, you have a motion?
I move to approve the 3 certificates of compliance
Second?
listed on the agenda.
Okay, we have a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
They all carry?
3 things for you to sign. Want to do minutes, and then I have several unanticipated items to talk to you about.
These minutes, that was one of those short meetings, so they're lean, which is good. So I have no comments.
I didn't see any problems with the minutes.
Did you get that one, Mark? I'm gonna put it right on the file.
Just make sure there's at least 4 signatures on all of them, please.
Yeah, Carolyn, Paula.
Carolyn's flight was changed to be earlier. She's supposed to leave later tomorrow, and I guess it's like red eye or something, I don't know. And hopefully I gotta touch base with Paula, she's doing well, she's hoping to come back to the first meeting in February, so next
good.
time. Hopefully we'll be starting to be in better shape. Numbers wise. Maybe other people can have a night off. So the minutes, you wanna vote on those?
Yeah. I move that we approve the minutes of January 16th, 2019.
Second.
September 19th.
Did I? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Wow. All right, then let me try and make another motion.
No, that's okay, you're voting to approve today's minutes before they're done.
Wow. It's getting late. So I motion to approve the minutes of September 19th, 2018.
Second.
Second by Stan. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Wow.
So, one thing I have under other business is, so 16 Harbor Road is the Manning property. And if you go down Harbor Drive on Winchmere Harbor, you pass the town of Shellfish. You keep going around as if you're going to the Stone Horse, right? So Stone Horse at the very end, it's the second house from that. I did take pictures, I did not print them out. They have an existing licensed dock, which they're allowed, and they are allowed in their permit to do maintenance to it, essentially. If it's not like complete reconstruction, it's maintenance. So what they wanna do, it's less than half. I went out there with their contractor, Skipper Lee, and they would like to replace a few pilings because several of them are rotted. And they would like to move one fender pile from one location at one end to another end. So there's no additional pilings going in. There is some piling replacement going on, and I think we can do it under just their maintenance provision, but I wanted to, one, let you know about it and see if you felt any different. I do have their site plan if you wanna see it real quick. I can show it to you. This was an old.
How does the maintenance provision function? Because it would be is in perpetuity? Is that how it goes?
It's licensed and maintained, and well, I have to apologize. This is not their dock plan. This is an old site plan. Not an old site plan, but it shows their dock. It's not the correct one. But essentially, it's up to us to decide what maintenance is, but the language as it was written in this one is like, if 50% or more of the structure has to be rebuilt, then it's not considered maintenance. But it was put on the ongoing conditions to allow them to do that.
50% was the language.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think we'd use that language now.
it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's been there for a while.
To me, it sounds like an RDA, but if it has that language, then what do you think? Would that be an RDA otherwise?
I think it would be an RDA otherwise. I think with the maintenance, basically replacing rotted piles with new piles, same location, and moving one fender pile to another location, I kind of view that as maintenance.
I think it's enough that you'd want to document that it was happening and have
absolutely.
something for the files. So
Administrative?
I'd normally say no, but if it's in the order, it says that
Yeah.
50%, then.
Yeah, they're allowed to, I mean, one of the things when people license them,
Are there many like that say,
the older ones.
yeah, the older ones? Yeah.
But, I mean, be able to maintain within reason, you know,
Yeah,
without having to come back with a new filing, I think is okay.
yeah. I mean, replacement means you've got to file again, you know,
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and
Yeah.
so they can go up to 50% of replacement without filing. That seems pretty generous.
And it kind of is determined, you know, this was clearly was well under that 50%. I mean, they don't need to do new decking, they don't need to do a lot of new things. It's really a couple of pilings that are rotted and then moving one. So it's probably 20% on this one, but it's up to.
Is it a T-dock?
It's
T-float,
got a couple of
T-float?
things. It's a weird configuration.
It's just to the east of, I think, the harbor yards, docks, I believe, or maybe,
Pretty
maybe
much.
the.
So don't took a look, this was a withdrawn plan that I pulled literally right before the meeting, just to give you an idea. So this is not here, this float is not here. They have a weird shape, they have two piers almost. They have a wooden walkway that goes out over this like dune-y type area, it's not really a dune. Then they have a raised walk, they have an existing pier here, so they wanna take, so this is, like I said, this is not here. This is what's out there right now, it's two L's, it's very strange.
And they're actually that close to each other, or is there space between for a boat? Right there?
There's actually, you know what? There is not, this is not here right now.
Right.
This is here
Yeah.
right now.
It wouldn't really make
This
sense.
is not even here, even though this
Right.
says existing pier,
Yeah.
this is not here.
Yeah. Okay.
So what they wanna do, this one needs a little work. No, I apologize, this ramp is here, it connects out here. So it goes this way. So they wanna, there's a few piles here that they need to replace, and they wanna take this pile and move it to this side.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, yes, there's a walkway out here. This doesn't exist, and that doesn't exist.
And the float's gonna be the same.
Yes, there's no expansion.
Yep.
So from a documentation standpoint, would you get anything from them?
Yes, I want notification, but I can do it administratively if you wanna have something a little bit more.
That, if people agree, I would say yeah, because that has no hearing requirement, no plan requirement.
Yeah.
But it still documents it.
It
Right.
documents it, and if they didn't have that language, I'd say RDA, just to keep
Yeah.
most
well,
dock work on the same, plane, but I think that's fine.
I just grabbed this because it was the first Manning file
Yeah.
that had to do with water, and I grabbed it five minutes before
Yep.
the meeting.
So,
But I'll take one of these plans, the accurate one, and just have them show where the pile relocation is.
so there's no way you can go back on any of these old ones and change it?
If
It's
it was granted a
grandfathered.
certificate
Yeah.
of compliance with those ongoing conditions, we cannot touch it.
Should maybe.
Until they, unless they have to rebuild it?
Would you have to review with Waterways about the relocation of that pile?
I'll talk to John Rendon about it, but I'll
So I
mention it
guess
to
if
John
you go over
Rendon.
to 50% and have to rebuild, that's where we could get the language
Yes,
changed,
For
right?
that, for that site. Another issue, a little bit related, is the off-season storage. And if we don't explicitly say that you can't put it in the resource area, there's some feeling that we can't force them now. But it's almost a gray area, because I'm of the mind, if they're impacting the resource area, we can.
I'll put it on the admin review that they can't for this one.
Well, but I'm just saying, conceptually,
On anybody,
a lot of
yes,
these older docks, it didn't
If
say.
it's silent.
Yeah, if it's silent, then I think the town's gonna say, well, you can't push too hard.
Yeah.
Whereas I might say, if there's an impact to the resource area, then we can tell them to remove
We've
it.
started
So,
to tackle
I-
these violations of such.
Yeah, I like the idea, we've talked about this before, sending out letters, seeing the real egregious cases where the footprint is killing all salt marsh
Yep.
every year. I think you send letters to those folks, and we start a discussion. And,
We did, we'll
it-
send them out again.
It hasn't gone well,
Wait
because
there.
I think there's some inertia that's gonna keep this from going forward, but I think, we can identify the ones as we look around, the ones that are really impactful. There are some where they put them, and they anchor them up, and so they sit in the marsh and they kill the marsh, and then with a super high tide, they get up and they move, and then they kill that
another
chunk.
spot. Yeah.
And there's a few like that between the two bridges in the Herring River, which we probably should pursue and at least send a letter.
Yep.
So, but no, I think that's fine, and I think it's good that they contacted you,
Yeah,
so that's, they did that.
it's more than a few people can say. You ready to
Yes.
hear about some of these violations?
Okay.
Another one today, it's a good one. Right as we were walking out the door, Nikki went to one. So I'm not gonna say the exact address, cause we're not in a hearing and I don't wanna throw anybody, we will, right now, these all have happened, well, we've investigated them, maybe they might have been older happening, but we've investigated them within this week. So they all have stop works on them right now, and we'll be issuing enforcement for fines and filing and replanting and all that jazz. So the first one is on Lover's Lane, that was today. It was a house that the commission permitted not too long ago for a rebuild. And they, the house has been done and the plantings that were supposed to have been there had been in there for a year or two, and today a lot of big trees came down and a lot of grading got done in the 50 and potentially even in the wetland. So that's a stop work, and that will be filing an after the fact notice of intent for restoration, and there will be a fine associated, like I will fine them. And if they want to ask for your reprieve, they can do so, but I'm gonna issue separate fines for grading and tree removal, at least. On Skinnequit Road, on Skinnequit Pond, it came to our attention that, somebody has a new, or not a new, but a dock, and recently clear cut the top of the bank. They also may have some accessory structures to their home that was not approved when the house was built.
New house, rebuild?
Huh?
New house, rebuild?
Not that new, but I mean, when the house was built, and then there are clearly some other things that were done more recently to the house without permit. Put it that way. On Uncle Vini's Road, on a project we've been to before, near the Herring Run, they were installing a chain link fence right up to the river. So
Is
that,
Is that the one we approved recently?
nope. You haven't seen, only one of you may know whose property this is, we'll put it that way.
Okay, no, because there were
It's-
3 on
Oh, yeah, nope.
Alcovini's.
No, it is
Okay.
not. It is, nope, it's not one of the ones you recently saw here for a notice of intent, or a hearing. It was a property several years ago.
Okay.
I'll give you the direct addresses, we'll have them on for official discussion
Mhm.
next meeting. This one though is fairly simple with the fence. They didn't take down any vegetation, they kinda weaved it in. It's a simple case of just remove it. It's all in the 0 to 50, and if they want things outside the 0 to 50, they can apply. And I'll be meeting with that homeowner.
Is it a site that's had previous violations?
Yes.
Then I think a fine is in order.
Well, yeah, I was going to.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, we have been tackling these outstanding violations, Floaton Marsh, and also, we've sent some letters, and we've also, particularly been tracking down, because it's easy to do so, on Pleasant Lake Avenue on Long Pond. Along Long Pond, we've gotten, on Pleasant, that stretch near the bike trail, pretty much those people who own those little beach areas there live across the street. And because it's been very degraded over the past couple of years. There's a couple of new sheds up, people are storing their docks right there, there's lawn, furniture being stored all over the place, there's like new fire pits, there's
Tree cutting?
it's just very blatant. So we documented everything, and we sent letters out to everybody. There's certain things like the kayak rack, that we would probably permit, because we want kayaks to be elevated, and maybe we would permit something like that. So, but there's a lot of other things that shouldn't be there, particularly these little sheds to hold, so they don't have to bring their stuff
Right.
across the street in the off-season.
You
They
almost get
store
the
everything.
feeling that so much has been going on there that now everybody's saying, hey, nobody's really watching, so
Yeah,
it's
well,
been
we are.
increasing. Yeah.
So, those letters went out, and we've gotten several calls and people coming in about that to try to follow up, and telling people right off the bat what's just not gonna be okay. And then others, instructing them to file for certain things. So,
Busy.
I know there's more, and I was just jotting them down before the meeting.
I haven't been down there. How did that go with the aquaculture gear on Herring River there?
Oh, I haven't checked this week, so that's right, that was another one. Up by the Bell's Neck, a company had been storing hundreds of traps of aquaculture, or oyster.
Big Rock
Yeah.
Company.
Right on the edge of the river. Problem is, the property they were storing them on, it used to belong privately, and now it's owned by the trust. So they were storing it right on the edge of the river. Jim saw it, contacted me. We went down there and,
Does the trust own the whole cranberry bog, or somehow?
do.
Oh, they do?
they now own
Okay.
the whole as of a couple weeks ago.
didn't
they
know
own
Oh,
that.
the
wow.
whole
Yeah.
thing.
All right.
It's still being leased out to the
Right.
previous grower there, the guy who was owning it. But yes, it's leased out, but the
Yeah.
trust owns it.
Okay.
But they were really, I mean, they weren't even storing stuff near the bogs or near the shop. It was like
It's right
in the
on the river.
woods near the edge of the river.
Yeah,
So
kind of weird.
it
It's all
didn't-
moved now,
Okay,
it's all up by the
Good.
building.
that's good.
good. They told me they were going to. I told them you really got to be in touch with the trust because that is their property. So the slope isn't trust property. It's like the bog road, the bog, and then towards the river.
It's all up on the slope right behind the building, so it's back on the land.
All right.
Perfect. And they asked me, they said, technically, it's within the buffer zone to the cranberry bog, can we do it? It's all lawn area, I said, it's way better than down by the river, so I didn't have an issue with that.
Right.
The same stretch of area, that industrial area, that Deerfield Road that got cut in, there's an awful lot of activity, this is something I have to go look at. But I saw, dirt being moved back there too.
Yeah, I
Right
know.
next to the bog here, and I know it's not Big Rock, I know it's the owners, I'm sure, of that park, but definitely within the 200 foot
Yeah, I
riverfront
know a lot of
area.
that property is
200 foot riverfront
within
area
200
there.
foot, some of it's even within 100 foot of the,
I've seen potential plans for activity outside the 200 foot zone, cause it's come in front of the various department heads here, but we made it very clear that nothing could happen within the 200, and it is, so.
so, I mean, a lot of it's already cleared within the 200, I think, isn't it?
A lot was cleared, but it was restoring itself to because they had stripped the soil.
Right.
It was restoring itself to like a heathland heather
Yeah.
community, which was actually kind of rare.
Yeah.
Um,
No, the boatyard
They've
looked into
they've-
buying that property, that's why I know all about it, but,
they've re-stripped it, so,
yeah.
and then just the constant encroachment issues that we've got going on, we're trying to deal with, so. We've been, this week, the past week in particular, especially after the first of the year, I mean, we were doing the town report, which I have to get to you for your sign off for the town book. We had 6 violations last year. I mean, I've had 6 in
This
almost
week.
a week.
Wow.
And they take a lot of time. It takes a half a day, cause so you know what goes behind it. You write the ticket, it's gotta go to all these different offices. We issue a stop work order, that's a form. We issue an enforcement order, that's a DEP form. I usually do a cover letter explaining what they did and why it's bad and what we need to do next, so walk people through it. It takes, you document it, you photograph it, you document everything. It takes a good half day per violation to do it, so it's a huge, just so you know, I mean, I want violators to know that too, it's so much better to ask permission than it is for forgiveness.
I
For
think,
everybody.
I think one way that works is when some strong actions are taken.
I think
the
we
word
need to.
gets around really quick. It's such a small community.
What's the minimum fine?
Well,
It's 300 per activity.
I have.
it's a small community in a way, but there's so many seasonal residents who don't spend much time off-season on their property, and it's unclear to me with some of these things, whether it's ignorance or defiance. you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And I don't, seasonal residents don't necessarily just get the word because somebody else gets an enforcement
People
action.
start talking though, if they start talking. So if there's a number of strong actions, even, contractors get the
I'm not
word.
saying it's not a good idea to
The
take strong
contractors
actions. I'm
need,
just-
and I've
Yeah, really.
every single contractor I've spoken to, I've said, we also have the ability to fine you. Like, it
Right.
is your responsibility, especially, to know the rules and regulations. And I can honestly say for each of these, I haven't even heard of the companies.
Oh, wow. Right.
Because
Yeah.
the regulars don't do it.
Right.
I haven't even heard of these companies. They're from the Cape, but not from this immediate area.
Yeah, with the building boom going on, and you're getting
Yeah,
more.
but regardless, the rules are
The
pretty much
rules
the
are
same.
the rules, but they
everywhere
just,
you go.
right, exactly, they are.
They should be aware, but if they're out of town, a lot of times the mindset is they're out of town.
Exactly.
300 is the maximum fine per day.
Offense.
Per offense, so it could be one tree, could be an offense if you
Right.
really wanted it to be. Or it could be a group of trees. I usually say, okay, like for the one on Lover's Lane, it was a few trees. It'll probably
Yeah.
be 300 for that. It's gonna be 300 for the clearing. The big thing is gonna be, they're gonna have to file a notice of intent and completely restore that.
Right.
The nice thing
that's
is we have a
expensive.
nice planting plan from when that house got built
Yeah.
that they can use to put it back how it was. So that's where the fines go into the general fund, which is great, but it really just does, it's a slap on the wrist. The real
Yeah.
monetary issue or incentive to not do it again comes when you refile.
NOI, right?
NOI with the
Yeah.
plant, and the plantings and the work to do the plantings.
Right.
That's where the big
Restoration
money
work.
comes
Yeah.
in. So we haven't had really big egregious ones too often lately, and then we're getting them right now, so.
Wow.
That
Not hesitant to fine people if we have to.
that one I mentioned by Island Pond, I know you've looked at with the white cedar tree
Yes.
cutting. One thought I had on that, I don't know if the commission has these type of things,
Sorry.
but some little signs that say, I don't know where you get them, that would say like, you know, sensitive Atlantic white cedar habitat,
We can make
no
them too,
public
but-
access,
Yeah,
something like that.
You could make a sensitive habitat or something like that, at least.
Yeah,
We,
I mean, I doubt the person had any idea that, you know,
yeah, this was
what
one
they were doing, but
right on the bike trail, and I don't think it's the people, wasn't done really for a view, if you kind of look at it, it's really somebody who wants to like use that as a little pond area for
yeah,
themselves.
access.
And fish or something, cause they cut the trees right next to the pond at like this high.
Oh, jeez.
So it's a couple, and there were a couple of cedars, but it's not the people
Right, no,
that I think are across the way.
yeah, I agree. I think it was to create an
I think it's
access
somebody who
point,
probably goes on
essentially.
the bike trail, brings a fishing pole, and, you know, they can
Yeah.
cast
A
easier
little
with the
fire
trees
pit
being
right there.
gone.
Yeah, it's a nice little spot, but I mean,
Is there a fire pit? There might have been a ring.
it has,
Knuckleheads will sometimes just cut a live tree thinking, okay, it's some firewood. And
Yeah.
You'll see that
It's
occasionally.
right against the pond. It looked to me like, oh, if somebody wanted to cast a fishing rod, it's easy access from the bike trail. If somebody wanted to cast a fishing rod, they're gonna get stuck in a tree, so they cut the tree down.
Get your lure back.
well, that'd be, it's just such a nice Atlantic white
Yeah,
cedar
let me write
habitat
that,
to do a
signage.
little bit of restoration, and a sign might go a long way. They might just have no idea that, you know, what it is.
Signage at Island Pond.
Because they could have just as easily avoided it and not cut down the cedars and just cut down tupelos or something, but it's just kind of indiscriminate.
Okay, so the
I don't know.
6th, we're gonna have a moderate agenda, or?
Yes, you're gonna have Hinkley Pond's coming back. Hinkley Pond will hopefully wrap up, I'm
Yep.
hoping. If you have any more questions for Heinz or anybody, please let me know. I have to go back and go through all the information we've sent you, it's just been, it's a lot. So we have Hinkley, we have, one from tonight. It's kinda nice to get done with some of these,
Yep.
one way or the other, it's nice to get done with them.
Yep.
Weeks, the South Street
Weeks,
will be on next time, as will, yeah, so those are the couple. It shouldn't be terrible, and I'm thinking for the second meeting in February as the meeting about the cranberry bogs.
We're gonna have Carolyn back and Paula.
That's what I wanna make sure of,
Yeah.
that's why I don't wanna do it on the 6th, it's too soon.
Is that school
I'm not
vacation
ready.
week by any chance? It looks
The
like.
20th?
Yeah, it might be,
Yeah, it might be.
yeah. So I might be out, but, you know, I feel like we need to start the discussion on that before
Mhm.
too long, so not a bad meeting to have it if, even if I can't be here.
Just know, I mean, I'm not gonna be ready to help present it on the 6th, it's just not gonna
Yeah.
happen.
Yep. Okay, sounds
You
good.
gave me some good information, which I will share, so. And we'll have an update on these for you.
Okay.
I may not call them in if it's just very clear that it's a fine and with an after-the-fact notice of intent for restoration. I'm not gonna have them come in for a show cause. It'll be for the you'll see them at the notice of intent. Sound okay? We do show cause hearings. Sometimes we ask people to come in, to explain why they did what they did. But in some cases, I think we issue the fine and go straight towards the after-the-fact notice of intent for restoration for a couple of these.
The ones on the herring run, that's when I'd like to do a check out. And
Yep, I'll give you the information. It's just it's
Yeah.
not really advertised today, so it's other. I didn't want to like say specifically where it was.
Right. Certain violations can have more impact than others.
My thought for that one right now is just stopped. I'm gonna have her remove it, and then if she wants to, and fine, and then if they want to put any fence there, it's for a dog. That it has to not be within the 60, really, the new
Yeah.
structure, and she's got to file for it.
Yeah, and the previous order of conditions needs to have no violations to that with, that particular part of the property. So,
Yeah, I think it might have been, honestly, it happened about 6 years ago, and that I think the property did change hands right around then.
yeah,
So it may have been different owners, but it's the same, but I don't know.
right, but they would still be obliged to adhere to that order of condition, right?
To maintain, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Still
Stays with the property, not the owner.
Right.
Yeah.
You could expect the new owner might not be tuned into that, so it's possible.
I mean, I see what she didn't take down trees to put it in, she kind of interwove it, she's probably thinking, oh, it's not a big deal, but I actually used it to kind of educate her a little bit about how important the near shore areas to a river or stream really are for habitat wise, and
Yeah.
it actually was a good conversation,
Okay.
so it
Yep.
wasn't all lost.
Yep. Should we adjourn? Anything else?
Need a motion.
I would move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.